Welcome back. The day is coming to an end, and now it's time to slow down. Take a moment to find a comfortable position. Let your breathing become calm and natural. Take one slow, gentle breath in, and one long breath out. Before we begin tonight's journey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. It's always amazing to see people joining from different countries, cities, and time zones around the world. Thank you for spending part of your evening here. Now relax, get comfortable, and let's gently drift into tonight's Buddhist story. Long ago, in a fertile valley surrounded by rivers and distant mountains, there lived a woman named Lila. If you had met her, you might have thought she was fortunate. She had a comfortable home, a loving husband, healthy children, enough food to eat, enough work to keep her occupied. To most people, her life appeared peaceful. Yet Lila carried a burden heavier than any sack of rice, any basket of firewood, or any load a traveler might carry along the mountain roads. She carried tomorrow, every day, every hour, every moment. When she woke in the morning, she worried about next week. When she ate lunch, she worried about next year. When she lay down to sleep, she worried about problems that had not yet arrived. Her mind lived in a future that did not exist. And because of this, she rarely experienced the life that was actually happening. If her children laughed in the garden, part of her wondered whether they would remain healthy. If the harvest looked strong, she worried about next season's weather. If her husband returned safely from town, she imagined accidents that might happen tomorrow. Even during happy moments, fear quietly followed her. Not because anything terrible was happening, but because something terrible might happen. The possibilities never ended, and neither did her worrying. At first, she believed her worry was useful. She told herself it made her responsible, prepared, careful. But over time, worry began consuming her peace, then her energy, then her joy. Gradually, she stopped noticing the beauty around her, the changing seasons, the songs of birds, the warmth of shared meals, the laughter of friends. Everything became overshadowed by what might happen next. One spring morning, as she hung laundry beside the river, her elderly neighbor watched her pacing back and forth. The neighbor's name was Amma. She was nearly 80 years old. Her back was bent, her hair completely white, yet her eyes carried an unusual calmness. People often visited her when life became confusing, not because she had all the answers, but because she seemed deeply at peace. As Lila paced nearby, Amma finally asked, "What are you carrying?" Lila stopped. "Carrying?" The old woman nodded. "You walk as though you are carrying something heavy." Lila laughed. "My hands are empty." Amma smiled. "Are they?" The question lingered, but Lila simply shook her head and continued working. That evening, she worried about the coming harvest. The next day, she worried about a rumor of rising prices in the city. The day after that, she worried about a cough her youngest son developed. The cough disappeared within 2 days. The worry remained. Weeks passed, then months. Summer arrived. The valley grew green and abundant. Yet Lila's mind remained trapped in futures that had not happened. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, she sat beside the river watching the current flow past. The water moved steadily, effortlessly. Nearby, Amma sat mending a basket. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Lila sighed. "I am tired." The old woman nodded. "Yes. I sleep enough. Yes. I eat enough. Yes. Then why am I always tired?" Amma placed the basket aside. Then she pointed toward the river. What do you see? Water. What else? A current. The old woman nodded. Imagine carrying a bucket of that river. Lila frowned. What do you mean? Fill a bucket and carry it. Lila laughed. It would be heavy. Yes. The old woman smiled. Now imagine carrying tomorrow. Lila fell silent. For the first time, she understood what Amma had been asking. The old woman continued. Most people carry today's responsibilities. She pointed toward the river. You carry today's responsibilities, tomorrow's responsibilities, next month's responsibilities, and problems that may never arrive. The words struck deeply because they were true, painfully true. Yet understanding the problem and solving it were not the same thing. The next morning, Lila woke determined to worry less. Within an hour, she was worrying about whether she would succeed. The irony was not lost on her. Several days later, Amma invited her for tea. The old woman's home overlooked the valley. From her porch, the entire landscape could be seen. Fields, forests, rivers, mountains. As they drank tea, Amma handed Lila a large basket. Hold this, Lila did. It was empty. Heavy? No. The old woman placed a single stone inside. Now, a little heavier. Then another stone, and another, and another. Soon the basket contained dozens of stones. Lila shifted uncomfortably. The weight increased rapidly. Finally, the basket became difficult to hold. Her arms began trembling. After several minutes, she set it down. Immediately, relief flooded through her body. Amma smiled. The basket is your mind. Lila listened carefully. The stones are your worries. The old woman pointed toward the basket. One stone may not seem significant, but enough stones carried long enough become exhausting. Lila stared at the basket. The lesson felt obvious, yet she had never truly seen it before. The following weeks became an experiment. Whenever she noticed herself worrying about something far in the future, she imagined placing another stone into the basket. At first, the practice revealed something surprising. Her mind generated far more worries than she realized. Dozens every day, sometimes hundreds. Most concerned events that never occurred. Others involved situations she could not control. Many contradicted one another. The realization was humbling. One afternoon, her husband returned from town later than expected. Immediately, her mind began creating stories. An accident, an illness, a robbery. Disaster after disaster unfolded in her imagination. Then she remembered the basket, another stone. She took a breath, then another. An hour later, her husband arrived home smiling. A wagon wheel had broken on the road. Nothing more. The imagined disasters vanished. Yet she noticed something important. The worry had not protected him. It had only exhausted her. Months passed. Slowly, Lila became more aware of her mental habits. Not free from them, aware of them. That alone changed many things. One autumn, the harvest was threatened by several weeks of unusual weather. Many villagers became anxious. Lila felt the familiar urge to spiral into fear. What if the crops fail? What if food becomes scarce? What if winter is difficult? Then she paused. She asked herself a simple question. What can I do today? The answer was clear. Help gather the crops that were ready. Store food carefully. Support her neighbors. The future remained uncertain, but today's actions were available. For the first time, she experienced the difference between preparation and worry. Preparation created movement. Worry created paralysis. Preparation solved problems. Worry rehearsed them. The distinction transformed her understanding. One winter evening, a traveling monk arrived in the village. The villagers gathered to hear his teachings. The monk spoke about many things: impermanence, compassion, mindfulness. Then he said something that immediately captured Lila's attention. The future is a useful servant, but a terrible home. The entire room grew quiet. The monk continued. Many people visit tomorrow. There is nothing wrong with that. We must plan. We must prepare. We must learn from the past and consider the future. He paused. The problem begins when we move there permanently. Lila felt as though the words were directed specifically at her. For years she had been living in tomorrow, not visiting, living. The monk smiled gently. You cannot breathe tomorrow's air. You cannot eat tomorrow's food. You cannot walk tomorrow's path. The only place life can ever be experienced is here. The lesson stayed with her long after the monk departed. Years continued passing. Gradually, the people closest to Lila noticed changes. She laughed more easily, listened more carefully, rushed less. When problems appeared, she handled them calmly, not because she stopped caring, but because she stopped carrying every possible future simultaneously. One spring morning, her youngest daughter asked, "Mother, why do you smile so much now?" Lila laughed. Then she thought carefully before answering. "Because I finally put down something very heavy." The child looked around. What was it? Lila pointed toward the sky. Clouds. The daughter looked confused. What? Lila smiled. I spent years trying to carry clouds. The child laughed, and perhaps that was the perfect answer. Many years later, when Amma grew very old and her final days approached, Lila visited her often. One evening they sat together watching the sunset. The valley glowed gold. Birds crossed the sky. The river reflected the fading light. Amma looked peaceful, very peaceful. Lila asked, "Were you ever afraid of tomorrow?" The old woman smiled. "Of course." The answer surprised her. "You were. Many times." "Then how did you become so calm?" Amma looked toward the horizon. Then she answered, "I stopped trying to arrive before I got there." The words settled deeply into Lila's heart. A few days later, Amma passed away quietly in her sleep. The village mourned her, yet everyone agreed she had lived well. Not because her life had been easy, because it had been fully lived. Lila carried that lesson forward. Years became decades. Her children grew, then had children of their own. The valley changed. The world changed. Life brought both joy and sorrow. Some worries she had once carried eventually came true. Many never did. The realization was important, because even when genuine difficulties arrived, she handled them better than she had handled imaginary ones. Reality, she discovered, was often easier than fear. Fear demanded endless rehearsal. Reality only required presence. As an old woman herself, Lila eventually became known for her wisdom. People came seeking advice. Young parents worried about their children. Farmers worried about future harvests. Merchants worried about uncertain markets. Everyone seemed to be carrying tomorrow. Whenever possible, she shared the same lesson. Not through long lectures, through questions. What can you do today? The answer often changed everything. One evening, near the end of her life, Lila sat beside the same river where Amma had first spoken to her many years earlier. The current flowed steadily, just as it always had. The water never hurried, never worried about reaching the sea. It simply moved, moment by moment, bend by bend, day by day. Watching it, Lila smiled. At last, she understood something she'd spent decades learning. Life unfolds exactly this way, not all at once, not a year at a time, not a decade at a time, a moment at a time, a breath at a time, a step at a time. The future eventually becomes the present, and when it does, we meet it exactly as we meet everything else. Here, now, not before, not after. As the evening deepened, she remembered Amma's basket of stones, how heavy it had felt, how unnecessary much of that weight had been. And she realized something beautiful. The future had never asked to be carried. It only asked to be met when it arrived. And perhaps that is the lesson. Many people spend their lives carrying tomorrows that never come, imagining problems that never happen, rehearsing conversations that never occur, fearing storms that never arrive. The burden feels real. The exhaustion feels real. Yet much of the weight comes not from life itself, but from trying to live several lives at once. Today's life, tomorrow's life, next year's life. The life we fear, the life we hope for, the life we imagine. Meanwhile, the only life actually available quietly waits. Here, in this breath, this conversation, this meal, this sunrise, this moment. The future will come, as it always does. But until then, perhaps we can set down the basket. Perhaps we can stop carrying clouds. Perhaps we can trust the road enough to walk it one step at a time. For the person who carries tomorrow everywhere eventually discovers a simple truth. The future becomes lighter the moment we stop trying to carry it before it arrives. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. The village of Shiro sat in a wide valley surrounded by forests and mountains. It was a peaceful place. Children played beside streams. Farmers worked fields passed down through generations. Merchants traveled slowly along winding roads. Life was simple, not easy, but simple. Like every village, Shiro experienced joy and sorrow, births and funerals, harvests and droughts, celebrations and disappointments. No one escaped these things. Among the villagers lived a young carpenter named Renji. He was respected throughout the valley. His hands were skilled. His work was precise. Tables, doors, chairs, and bridges crafted by Renji lasted for decades. People trusted him. They admired his patience. Yet beneath his calm exterior lived a mind constantly at war with itself. Whenever something unpleasant happened, Renji suffered twice, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 10 times. A minor mistake would occupy his thoughts for weeks. A criticism would replay in his mind for months. A disappointment would grow larger each time he remembered it. He rarely noticed this habit, because it felt normal. Most people around him behaved similarly. One spring morning, while helping repair a roof, Renji slipped. He fell several feet and injured his shoulder. The injury was not severe. Painful, certainly, but not permanent. The village doctor examined him. "You must rest for several weeks." Renji nodded. Yet as he walked home, something strange began happening. The physical pain remained in his shoulder, but another kind of pain appeared inside his mind. Why did this happen? What if it never heals properly? What if I cannot work again? What will people think? What if customers stop coming? What if this ruins everything? By evening, the mental suffering exceeded the physical injury. His shoulder hurt, but his thoughts hurt more. The following days became miserable, not because the injury worsened, because Renji constantly fed it with fear. Every ache became evidence of disaster. Every discomfort became a prediction. Every uncertainty became a threat. Eventually, his wife grew concerned. You seem more troubled than injured. Renji frowned. My shoulder hurts. I know. She looked at him gently. But something else hurts too. He did not answer, because he knew she was right. Several days later, an elderly monk arrived in the village. His name was Venerable Taro. He often traveled between mountain monasteries, stopping briefly in villages along the way. People respected him, not because he performed miracles, because he listened carefully. When Renji's wife suggested visiting him, the carpenter resisted. What could a monk possibly know about injuries? Still, boredom and frustration eventually persuaded him. One afternoon, he walked to the temple where Taro was staying. The monk welcomed him warmly. After tea was served, Renji explained everything: the fall, the injury, the fear, the frustration, the uncertainty. The old monk listened quietly. When Renji finished, Taro asked, "Does your shoulder hurt right now?" "Yes." The monk nodded, then asked, "And what else hurts?" Renji looked confused. "What do you mean?" The monk smiled. "Besides the shoulder." The carpenter opened his mouth, then closed it again, because he suddenly realized the answer. Fear hurt, worry hurt, anger hurt, frustration hurt. The injury was not alone. The monk continued, "Imagine a man walking through the forest." Renji listened. Suddenly, an arrow strikes his leg. The old monk paused. "It hurts." "Of course." The carpenter nodded. "Then imagine the man immediately shoots himself with a second arrow." Renji frowned. "Why would anyone do that?" The monk smiled. "Exactly." Silence filled the room. Finally, Taro continued. "The first arrow is unavoidable pain. The second arrow is everything we add to it." The words settled slowly. The monk continued. "The injury is the first arrow. The fear is the second. The anger is the second. The endless worrying is the second. The stories about what might happen are the second." Renji stared at the floor. Something about the image felt painfully accurate. For days he had been shooting himself with second arrows, again and again. The injury remained, yet he had multiplied his suffering through resistance. That evening, he returned home thinking about arrows. Not medicine, not recovery, arrows. The next morning, his shoulder still hurt. The first arrow remained. But when fearful thoughts appeared, he noticed them differently. Second arrow. When frustration arose, second arrow. When catastrophic predictions appeared, second arrow. The practice did not eliminate suffering immediately, but it created space. For the first time, he could distinguish between pain and the story surrounding pain. Several weeks later, his shoulder improved. The physical injury healed exactly as the doctor predicted. Yet the lesson remained, and life quickly provided opportunities to practice it. One summer afternoon, a wealthy customer rejected a piece of furniture Renji had spent weeks creating. The criticism stung. The first arrow landed. Disappointment, embarrassment, frustration. Then the familiar thoughts arrived. "I'm not good enough. My reputation is ruined. Everyone will hear about this. The business will fail." But now he recognized them. Second arrows. He smiled despite himself. The rejection still hurt, yet not nearly as much as before. Months passed. The lesson deepened. One autumn, heavy rains destroyed part of the harvest. Farmers throughout the valley became distressed. Some worried constantly about winter. Others argued with neighbors. Several blamed themselves. Several blamed fate. Several blamed the weather. The suffering spread far beyond the damaged crops. One evening, Renji found himself discussing the situation with Taro. The monk listened, then asked, "Did the rain create all this suffering?" The carpenter considered carefully. Partly, but not entirely. The ruined crops were real. Yet much of the anguish came from thoughts about the future, thoughts about unfairness, thoughts about what should have happened. Second arrows. The old monk nodded. You are beginning to see. Years passed. One winter, Renji's father became seriously ill. The illness arrived suddenly. Within weeks, the entire family understood the situation. The old man would not recover. The reality hurt deeply, perhaps more deeply than anything Renji had experienced. The first arrow felt enormous. He loved his father. The impending loss was real, painful, unavoidable. For several days, grief consumed him. Then one evening, while sitting beside his father's bed, he noticed something. Alongside sadness lived another suffering. Resistance. A desperate demand that reality become different. A refusal to accept what was happening. The second arrow had returned. Not through fear this time, through attachment, through the belief that life should not change. Tears filled his eyes, because he finally understood something important. The Buddha never taught that pain could be avoided. Even enlightened beings grow old, become ill, lose loved ones, experience sorrow. The first arrow belongs to everyone. The second arrow is optional, not easy to avoid, but optional. His father passed away peacefully several weeks later. The grief remained, yet something felt different. Renji mourned fully, cried openly, remembered lovingly, without adding unnecessary resistance. The experience transformed him. Many years later, people began seeking his advice. Not because he became a monk, not because he became famous, because he had become wise. One day, a young woman visited him after the end of a relationship. Her heartbreak was obvious. She cried throughout most of the conversation. Renji listened patiently, then asked, "What hurts most?" The woman immediately described abandonment, loneliness, loss, the first arrow. Then gradually she revealed something else. Fear she would never be loved again. Shame about what others might think. Anger toward herself. Anger toward her former partner. The second arrows. When she finally paused, Renji gently explained the teaching, not as philosophy, as experience. The woman listened carefully, then asked, "So I should stop feeling sad?" Renji shook his head. "No. Sadness is natural. Sadness is the first arrow." He smiled kindly. "Let yourself feel it." The woman looked relieved, because many people confuse acceptance with suppression. The teaching was never about denying pain, only about not multiplying it. Years continued flowing by. The village changed. Children became adults. Adults became elders. New houses appeared. Old houses disappeared. Through it all, Renji continued observing arrows, everywhere. A merchant lost money and added shame. Second arrow. A farmer experienced drought and added resentment. Second arrow. A young man failed an examination and added self-hatred. Second arrow. The pattern seemed endless. One spring morning, while working beside the river, Renji watched a child fall from a bicycle. The boy scraped his knee and immediately began crying. The injury was minor, yet moments later another child approached. Instead of helping, he laughed. The injured boy's crying intensified. Renji smiled sadly. There it was again. The first arrow, then the second. The lesson seemed woven into every aspect of life. Late in life, Renji visited Taro one final time. The old monk now lived permanently in a mountain temple. Age had slowed him considerably, yet his eyes remained bright. The two men sat overlooking a valley filled with autumn colors. After a long silence, Renji asked, "Master, why do people keep shooting second arrows?" The monk laughed softly. "Because they don't realize they are holding the bow." The answer felt perfect, simple, direct, true. For many years, Renji reflected on those words. Most suffering added itself automatically, habitually, unconsciously. People rarely noticed the moment they picked up the bow, yet awareness changed everything. As old age approached, Renji experienced new forms of pain. His joints ached, his eyesight weakened, his energy declined. The first arrows multiplied, yet surprisingly, he became more peaceful. Not because life became easier, because he stopped arguing with reality. One evening, his grandson asked, "Grandfather, are you afraid of getting old?" Renji smiled. "I don't enjoy the aching knees." The boy laughed. "But are you afraid?" The old carpenter looked toward the sunset, then answered honestly, "Sometimes." The boy seemed surprised. "You still get afraid?" "Of course," Renji smiled. "The difference is that I no longer build a house for the fear to live in." The child did not fully understand, but one day he would. Because life teaches everyone about arrows. Every person experiences pain. Every person experiences loss. Every person encounters disappointment. The first arrow never asks permission. It arrives. The Buddha understood this deeply. He never promised a life without difficulty. Instead, he pointed towards something liberating. The realization that much suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our relationship to them. Pain becomes suffering, loss becomes bitterness, fear becomes panic, because we add layer after layer, arrow after arrow. The teaching does not eliminate sadness. It does not eliminate grief. It does not eliminate pain. It simply asks a question. After the first arrow lands, must we keep shooting? The answer changes everything. For perhaps the greatest freedom available to us is not controlling what happens, but learning how to respond. Learning to feel pain without becoming pain. Learning to experience grief without becoming trapped by grief. Learning to meet difficulty without multiplying it. The first arrow may be unavoidable, but the second arrow rests in our hands, and wisdom begins the moment we notice the bow. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a quiet monastery near the edge of a pine forest, there was a small ceramic bowl that everyone knew. It was not made of gold. It was not decorated with jewels. It was not rare or expensive. Yet the monks treated it with care. The bowl was white, with a thin blue line painted around its rim. Its surface showed small marks from years of use. A faint crack ran along one side, carefully repaired with golden lacquer. Every morning, the bowl was placed on the table in the meditation hall. It held fresh water, nothing more. The monks said the bowl reminded them of gratitude, clear water, simple need, enough. Among the youngest students in the monastery was a boy named Miko. Miko was kind-hearted, but careless. He moved quickly. He forgot instructions. He often reached before looking. One morning, while helping clean the meditation hall, Miko lifted the bowl from the table. He meant to carry it carefully, but his sleeve caught the edge of a candle stand. He stumbled. The bowl slipped from his hands. For one brief moment, it hung in the air. Then it struck the stone floor. The sound echoed sharply through the hall. The bowl broke into several pieces. Miko froze. His face turned pale. Several monks turned toward him. No one spoke. The boy looked at the broken pieces scattered across the floor. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The abbot, an elderly monk named Master Hosen, walked slowly toward him. Miko lowered his head, expecting anger. Instead, Hosen knelt beside the broken bowl. He picked up one piece, then another. His movements were gentle. After a long silence, he asked, "Miko, what do you see?" The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I ruined it." The old monk nodded. "That is one way to see." Miko looked confused. "What else is there?" Hosen held up a piece of the bowl. "This bowl held water for many years." Miko said nothing. "It sat through thousands of mornings." The monk continued. "It served the monastery quietly. It reminded many people to be grateful." He placed the broken piece into Miko's hands. "Now it teaches one more lesson." The boy looked down at the fragment. "What lesson?" Master Hosen smiled softly. "That even when something breaks, not everything is lost." The words entered the quiet hall. The monks began helping gather the pieces. Later that day, Hosen and Miko sat together near the garden. The broken bowl rested between them on a cloth. Miko still looked ashamed. The old monk asked, "Are you sad because the bowl broke?" "Yes." "Or because you broke it?" Miko hesitated. "Both." Hosen nodded. "That is honest." The wind moved gently through the trees. Then the old monk said, "Many people suffer because they believe only perfect things deserve gratitude." Miko listened. A perfect bowl, a perfect day, a perfect family, a perfect life. He touched one of the broken pieces. "But life is rarely perfect." Miko whispered, "Then what should we be grateful for?" The old monk smiled. "For what remains." The next morning, the bowl did not sit on the table. Its absence felt strange. Miko noticed it immediately. For days, he avoided looking at the empty space. Then Master Hosen gave him a task. "Come with me." They carried the broken pieces to a small workshop behind the monastery. There, the old monk prepared lacquer mixed with gold powder. Carefully, slowly, he began joining the fragments. Miko watched. It took many days. Each piece had to be placed gently. Each seam had to be sealed. Each crack had to be honored rather than hidden. At first, Miko thought the bowl would look ugly. But as the repair continued, something unexpected happened. The golden lines formed a pattern. The bowl no longer looked the same. It looked changed, marked, but beautiful. When the repair was finished, Master Hosen placed the bowl back in the meditation hall. The monks gathered around it. Miko stared. The bowl was broken and whole, both at once. Master Hosen filled it with water. The bowl held. Miko smiled for the first time in days. Years passed. Miko grew older. He became more careful, though never perfect. No one is. Whenever he made mistakes, he remembered the bowl. Whenever someone else made mistakes, he remembered the bowl. He learned that anger often sees only the breaking. Wisdom looks for what can still be held. One winter, a traveler came to the monastery. He had lost his home in a fire. He carried nothing but a small bag of clothing. His face was hollow with grief. "I have nothing left," he told the monks. Miko, now a young man, listened quietly. Then he brought the traveler to the meditation hall. He pointed to the bowl. The traveler looked at it. "It is beautiful." Miko nodded. "It was broken." The traveler leaned closer and saw the golden seams. Miko said, "It could not become what it is now without first becoming broken." The traveler's eyes filled with tears. For the first time since the fire, he breathed deeply. not because his loss disappeared. It did not. But because he understood that brokenness was not always the end of a story. Many seasons passed. The bowl remained in the meditation hall. Visitors often admired it. Some loved its simplicity. Others loved the golden cracks. But those who knew its story saw something deeper. They saw a child's mistake, an old monk's patience, a lesson in gratitude, a reminder that life can still hold meaning after damage. And perhaps that is the lesson. Everyone will one day hold something broken, a plan, a relationship, a dream, a season of life, a part of themselves. At first, we may see only what has been lost, the missing pieces, the sharp edges, the crack running through what once seemed whole. But wisdom asks us to look again. What remains? What can still be repaired? What can still hold water? Gratitude does not mean pretending nothing broke. It means honoring what is still here, the breath still moving, the love still remembered, the lesson still available, the heart still capable of kindness. The bowl may never look the way it once did. But perhaps beauty is not found only in what has never been damaged. Perhaps beauty also lives in what has been broken, repaired, and returned gently to service. So when something breaks, mourn it. Hold it carefully. Gather the pieces. But do not forget to look for what remains. For sometimes the golden lines of healing become part of the beauty itself. The old maple tree stood alone on a hillside overlooking the valley. It had stood there longer than anyone could remember, longer than the oldest villagers, longer than the oldest stories, longer even than the stone path that wound up the hill toward the temple. Generation after generation had passed beneath its branches. Children climbed it, travelers rested beneath it, birds nested within it, seasons moved through it, yet the tree remained. In spring, fresh green leaves appeared. In summer, the canopy spread wide and generous. In autumn, the hillside blazed with gold and crimson. In winter, the branches stood bare against the sky. Then the cycle began again. Most people admired the tree. Few paid close attention to what it was teaching. Among the monks living at the nearby temple was a man named Haru. Haru had entered monastic life many years earlier. He was disciplined, thoughtful, respected. Yet he struggled with something he rarely discussed. He had difficulty letting go, not of possessions. Monastic life had already simplified those. He struggled to let go of memories, old mistakes, old regrets, old hurts. Conversations from years ago still visited him. Embarrassing moments, painful losses, missed opportunities. The mind carried them like stones hidden beneath a robe. Most people never noticed. Haru barely noticed anymore. The burden had become familiar. One autumn morning, the abbot asked him to repair a section of the hillside path. The work required several days. Each morning, Haru climbed the hill carrying tools. Each evening he returned. The old maple tree stood nearby throughout the process. On the first day, its leaves glowed brilliantly. Gold, orange, red. The colors seemed almost unreal. The monk admired them briefly, then returned to work. Several days later, a strong wind arrived. Leaves began falling, thousands of them. They drifted through the air like sparks from a fire. The hillside transformed. The tree slowly emptied itself. Haru watched while working. The sight stirred something he could not explain. That evening, he mentioned it to the abbot. "The tree seems different." The old monk smiled. "It is. It is losing everything." The abbot looked toward the window. "Is it?" Haru frowned. "What else would you call it?" The old monk laughed softly. Perhaps making room. The answer lingered. The following morning, Haru returned to the path. More leaves had fallen. The ground beneath the tree was covered. Yet something appeared strange. The tree did not look distressed. It did not seem frightened. It did not cling to its leaves. It simply released them, one by one, branch by branch. The process appeared natural, effortless. The monk found himself strangely envious. For years, he had been carrying things much older than those leaves. Things no longer useful, things no longer alive. Yet he continued holding them. Why? The question followed him throughout the day. Several weeks later, a traveling merchant arrived at the temple. The man carried many possessions, several carts, numerous assistants, boxes filled with expensive goods. Yet despite his wealth, he seemed exhausted. During dinner, he complained constantly about business rivals, past betrayals, old arguments, lost opportunities. The list never ended. Afterward, Haru walked with the abbot. The old monk smiled. He reminds me of someone. Haru laughed. Who? The abbot glanced sideways. You. The younger monk stopped walking. The old man continued. You carry different things, but you carry them just the same. The words landed heavily, because they felt true. That winter, snow covered the hillside. The maple tree stood bare. Its branches reached into the grey sky. Many visitors assumed it looked lifeless. The monks knew better. Life remained, invisible, waiting. One afternoon, while meditating near the tree, Haru noticed something. The branches did not mourn the missing leaves. They did not seem diminished. They simply existed, completely present. The realization felt important. For years, he had believed letting go meant losing something. Perhaps that belief was wrong. Perhaps letting go created space, the way autumn created space for winter, the way winter created space for spring, the way an empty bowl creates space for tea. The thought stayed with him. Several months later, spring arrived. Tiny buds appeared along the branches, then leaves, fresh, green, new. The transformation amazed him. The tree had not suffered because it released the old leaves. It had flourished because it released them. The lesson deepened. What if the same principle applied to people? What if holding everything prevented renewal? What if clinging blocked growth? The possibility felt both hopeful and uncomfortable because it implied responsibility. One evening, Haru sat alone reviewing old memories. A mistake from his youth surfaced, one he had replayed countless times. Normally he would analyze it again, judge it again, regret it again. Instead, he imagined the maple tree, autumn wind, falling leaves, branch releasing what no longer belonged. The memory remained, but something changed. For the first time, he stopped gripping it. The experience felt strange, like unclenching a fist after years. Nothing dramatic happened, no lightning, no revelation, just a small release, a little less weight, a little more space. Years passed, the practice continued, not perfectly, not constantly, but consistently. Whenever old resentments appeared, Haru remembered the leaves. Whenever regrets resurfaced, he remembered the leaves. Whenever attachment tightened around his thoughts, he remembered the leaves. Gradually, the burden grew lighter. One autumn, a young novice approached him. The boy looked troubled. "I cannot stop thinking about something." Haru smiled. "What happened?" The novice described an argument, an insult, a painful misunderstanding. The details mattered less than the pattern. The young monk carried it everywhere, like a stone. Haru listened carefully, then led him to the maple tree. Autumn had arrived once again. Leaves drifted gently from the branches. The novice watched silently. After several minutes, Haru asked, "What is the tree doing?" "Losing its leaves." The older monk nodded. "Why?" The novice shrugged. "Because it has to." Haru smiled. "Exactly." The lesson began working immediately, not because it solved the boy's problem, because it changed his relationship with it. The years flowed onward. The maple tree continued its cycles: spring, summer, autumn, winter. Again and again, the tree became famous among the monks, not for its beauty, though it was beautiful, for its teaching. Many visitors sat beneath it. Many lessons emerged there. Each person saw something different, yet most discovered the same truth eventually. Nothing can be held forever. Not possessions, not emotions, not seasons, not identities, not even life itself. The attempt creates suffering. The release creates freedom. Late in life, Haru climbed the hillside one final autumn. His hair had turned white. His steps had slowed. The maple tree remained. Golden leaves filled its branches. The sight looked exactly as it had decades earlier, and entirely different. The old monk sat beneath the canopy. Leaves drifted around him. One landed gently in his lap. He picked it up, studied its color, its shape, its delicate veins, beautiful and temporary. The combination felt perfect. For a long time, he simply sat, watching leaves fall, watching clouds move, watching the afternoon light change. Nothing needed improvement. Nothing needed holding. Nothing needed resisting. The lesson had finally become part of him. Several days later, a young monk asked, "Master, what is the secret to peace?" Haru smiled, then pointed toward the maple tree. The novice looked confused. "The tree?" The old monk nodded. "What does it teach?" The younger monk thought carefully. "It lets go." Haru smiled. "Yes." The novice waited. The older monk continued. "Every year." The simplicity felt profound, because wisdom often is. And perhaps that is the lesson. Many people spend years holding things that life is asking them to release. Old anger, old guilt, old identities, old expectations, old versions of themselves. The grip becomes so familiar, they mistake it for necessity. Yet nature teaches something different. The tree does not keep last year's leaves. The river does not keep yesterday's water. The sky does not keep last season's clouds. Life renews itself through release. The Buddha taught that clinging creates suffering because reality is constantly changing. We try to hold what must move, keep what must leave, preserve what must transform. The struggle exhausts us. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending something never mattered. The tree does not reject its leaves. It simply releases them when their season ends. We can do the same. Honor the memory, learn the lesson, appreciate the experience, then allow it to fall, so that something new may grow. Like the old maple tree on the hillside, we too become lighter when we stop carrying every season forever. And in that release, we discover that losing is not always the opposite of growing. Sometimes it is the beginning of it. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. At the edge of a great valley stood a village famous for its cloth. Travelers came from distant regions to purchase the fabric woven there. The colors were rich, the patterns intricate, the craftsmanship exceptional. Every household possessed at least one loom. The sound of weaving filled the streets from dawn until evening. Threads crossed, patterns emerged, cloth appeared. Generation after generation, the art continued. Among the villagers lived a young woman named Emmy. She was considered one of the most talented weavers of her age. Her hands moved quickly. Her designs impressed everyone. Merchants often competed to purchase her work. Yet despite her skill, Emmy carried a quiet frustration. She wanted recognition, not appreciation. Recognition. The difference mattered. Appreciation felt pleasant. Recognition felt important. Whenever buyers praised the village, she wished they would praise her specifically. Whenever people admired the cloth, she wished they understood who created it. The desire was understandable, very human, and increasingly exhausting. One autumn afternoon, a wealthy merchant purchased several pieces of her finest work. After carefully inspecting the fabric, he smiled. The village continues producing remarkable cloth. Emmy forced a polite smile. The village, not her. The merchant continued praising the community, the traditions, the region, the craftspeople collectively. By the time he departed, irritation simmered inside her. She returned home frustrated. Her grandmother immediately noticed. The older woman rarely missed much. "What troubles you?" Emmy sighed. "Nobody sees me." The grandmother smiled. "I can see you. You know what I mean." The old woman nodded. She did. Very well. Emmy's grandmother, Akiko, had woven cloth for more than 60 years. Her hands had grown slower, her eyesight weaker. Yet many villagers still sought her advice. Not because she produced the finest cloth anymore, because she understood things beyond weaving. She listened quietly, then asked, "Who made the cloth?" The question seemed absurd. "I did." Akiko nodded. "Alone?" "Of course." The grandmother smiled gently. The expression immediately annoyed Emmy, because it suggested a lesson was coming, and lessons often arrived disguised as questions. The older woman pointed toward the loom. "Who built it?" Emmy frowned. "A carpenter." "Who taught the carpenter?" The young woman hesitated. "Another carpenter." The grandmother continued. "Who grew the trees?" "The forest." "Who brought the water that fed the forest?" The lesson was beginning to appear, yet Emmy resisted. "That isn't what I mean." Akiko nodded. "I know." The older woman returned to her work. The conversation seemed unfinished, which meant it probably wasn't. Several days later, the village prepared for the annual harvest festival. The celebration brought together farmers, merchants, artisans, travelers, and families from across the valley. Everyone participated. Food was shared, music played, stories were told. For a few days each year, the entire valley felt connected. Emmy helped prepare decorative banners for the event. While working, she noticed something. Every banner required many different contributions. The cloth came from weavers. The dyes came from merchants. The wooden poles came from carpenters. The designs came from artists. The fibers came from farmers growing flax. No single person could create the entire banner alone. The observation lingered, yet she dismissed it quickly. A banner was one thing. Her work was different, or so she believed. During the festival, a wandering monk arrived. His name was Master June. He carried little, owned almost nothing, yet wherever he stopped, people gathered. Not because he performed miracles, because he told stories. And somehow his stories always revealed something about the listener. One evening, The villagers invited him to speak beside a large fire. Children sat near the front. Adults gathered behind them. The stars appeared overhead. The monk smiled, then began. There once lived a spider who believed she created her web alone. The crowd listened carefully. The story seemed simple at first. The spider worked tirelessly, built beautiful webs, took pride in her skill. Then one day, a storm destroyed everything. The spider became angry. She blamed the wind, the rain, the branches, the world itself. Eventually, an old spider asked, "Who held your web?" The younger spider answered, "I did." The elder shook her head. "The branches held it." The story continued. Who supported the branches? The tree. Who nourished the tree? The soil. Who watered the soil? The rain. Who carried the rain? The clouds. Who moved the clouds? The wind. The web depended on countless things. The spider's work mattered, but it never existed independently. The monk finished the story, then remained silent. The villagers reflected quietly. Emmy felt strangely uncomfortable, because the story sounded familiar. The next morning, she visited the monk. Master June sat beneath a tree drinking tea. The young weaver bowed respectfully, then asked, "Do you believe nobody accomplishes anything alone?" The monk smiled. An interesting question. "Do you?" Emmy crossed her arms. "I weave the cloth myself." The monk nodded. "Show me." Confused but curious, she led him to her workshop. The loom stood ready. Thread waited. Everything appeared ordinary. The monk examined the room carefully, then pointed toward the thread. "Where did that come from?" "The flax." "Where did the flax come from?" "The fields." "And the fields?" The conversation felt familiar again, much too familiar. The monk smiled, then pointed toward her hands. "Who taught you to weave?" Emmy hesitated. "My grandmother." The monk nodded. "And who taught her?" The answer continued backward through generations. Teacher after teacher, parent after parent, knowledge traveling through time. Eventually the monk asked, "If every teacher disappeared, could you weave?" The young woman remained silent. The lesson was becoming difficult to ignore. Weeks passed. The questions stayed with her, not because she wanted them to, because they appeared everywhere. One morning, while eating breakfast, she noticed the bowl. Someone shaped the clay. Someone gathered the clay. Someone fired the kiln. Someone cut the wood fueling the kiln. Someone transported supplies. Someone built the roads. The bowl suddenly seemed less ordinary. Later, she walked through the marketplace. The same pattern appeared. Every object depended upon countless people. Every person depended upon countless others. The realization felt overwhelming, not unpleasant, just enormous, like standing beside the ocean for the first time. One afternoon, a drought began affecting the valley. Rain failed to arrive. Streams shrank. Fields suffered. Concerns spread quickly. The weavers worried too. Without healthy crops, flax production would decline. Without flax, thread would decline. Without thread, cloth would decline. For the first time, Emmy clearly saw the connection. The weavers depended upon farmers. The farmers depended upon rain. The merchants depended upon both. The village functioned like a web. Touch one strand. The entire structure responded. The realization changed something inside her. Not completely, but noticeably. Several weeks later, she visited a farmer named Daiichi. In previous years, she barely knew him. Their lives seemed unrelated. Now she saw things differently. The farmer welcomed her warmly. They spent the afternoon talking about weather, harvests, work. challenges. By the time she returned home, she understood something important. The cloth she wove began long before it reached her loom. Much earlier, in fields, in rain, in sunlight, in labor she never witnessed. The realization humbled her, and strangely, it also brought relief. The need for recognition began loosening slightly, because the work was larger than any single person. Months later, disaster struck. A fire broke out near the western edge of the village. Strong winds spread flames rapidly. Several buildings became threatened, including the weaving district. Panic erupted. People rushed in every direction. Buckets of water appeared. Shouts filled the air. Fear spread quickly. Emmy immediately ran toward her workshop, her loom, her supplies, her work. Everything seemed at risk. Then something unexpected happened. The entire village arrived. Farmers, carpenters, merchants, children, elders, everyone. They formed lines carrying water, moved supplies, protected homes, helped one another. The fire eventually stopped, not because one person saved the village, because everyone did, together. That night, exhausted villagers gathered in the square. The damage could have been far worse, much worse. Emmy looked around, faces illuminated by firelight, people helping people, threads crossing, lives connected, a web becoming visible. For the first time, she truly understood what the monk meant. The next morning, she visited her grandmother. Without saying anything, she sat beside her. Akiko smiled knowingly. "You see it now." It wasn't a question. Emmy nodded, slowly. The old woman reached for a spool of thread, then held up a single strand. Easy to break. She snapped it instantly. Then she held up woven cloth. Thousands of threads crossing together, interconnected, supporting one another, strong. The lesson needed no explanation. That evening, after speaking with her grandmother, Emmy remained awake long after the village had gone to sleep. Moonlight spilled through the workshop window. The loom stood quietly in the corner. Spools of thread rested neatly upon shelves. Everything appeared unchanged. Yet something inside her had shifted. For years, she viewed herself as the center of her work, the creator, the maker, the source. Now she could no longer see things the same way. The cloth before her seemed transformed, not physically, but in meaning. Every thread carried a story. Every strand represented countless unseen contributions. The rain, the soil, the farmer, the merchant, the teacher, the carpenter who built the loom, the generations who preserved the craft. None of them appeared in the finished cloth, yet all of them existed within it, invisible, essential, connected. The realization felt humbling and strangely beautiful. The next morning, Emmy returned to her work, but this time she paid attention differently. When she touched the thread, she remembered the fields. When she used the loom, she remembered the carpenter. When she followed a pattern, she remembered her grandmother. Ordinary actions suddenly felt richer, more alive, as though hidden layers had become visible. The cloth no longer felt like something she created alone. It felt like something passing through many hands, many lives, many causes and conditions. For the first time, weaving felt less like ownership and more like participation. Several days later, Master Jun prepared to leave the village. Before departing, he visited the marketplace one final time. Many villagers came to say goodbye, including Emmy. The young woman bowed respectfully, then said, "I think I understand your story now." The monk smiled. "Dangerous words," she laughed. "Perhaps." The old teacher waited. Emmy thought carefully, then explained. We are all part of the same web. The monk nodded. A good beginning. The answer surprised her. A beginning? The monk looked toward the horizon. The web is larger than you think. Before she could ask what he meant, he bowed gently and continued down the road, leaving her with another question. Months passed. Summer arrived. The village recovered fully from the fire. Business improved. Harvests returned. Life seemed normal again. Yet Emmy kept thinking about the monk's final words. The web is larger than you think. One afternoon, a merchant arrived from a distant coastal city. He purchased several pieces of cloth. While negotiating, he described life near the ocean. Fishing boats, storms, ports, markets, cultures unlike anything Emmy had ever seen. The conversation fascinated her. For the first time, she considered how far her work traveled. The cloth she wove might cross mountains, rivers, cities, perhaps even oceans. People she would never meet might wear it, use it, depend upon it. The realization expanded her understanding. The web extended beyond the village, far beyond. Later that year, another lesson arrived unexpectedly. A severe storm struck the region. Not a fire this time, flooding. Heavy rain overwhelmed rivers. Roads became impassable. Several villages suffered extensive damage, including communities far beyond Green Hollow. For weeks, news arrived slowly. Travel remained difficult. Communication limited. Many villagers felt helpless. The affected communities seemed distant, almost abstract. Then a caravan finally arrived carrying refugees, families displaced by the floods, people who lost homes, possessions, livelihoods. The suffering suddenly became personal, visible, human. The villagers responded immediately. Food was shared, shelter offered, clothing donated. Emmy contributed several rolls of cloth. The act felt natural, necessary. Yet one evening, while helping distribute supplies, she noticed something remarkable. The refugees expressed gratitude not only for the cloth, but for the people behind it. The farmers who grew the flax, the merchants who transported materials, the weavers who created fabric. Everyone contributed. The web revealed itself again. One person's work became another person's comfort. One village's effort became another village's support. Invisible threads connecting lives that never previously met. The experience changed her deeply. Until then, interconnectedness remained largely an idea, a philosophy, a perspective. Now it became real, concrete, human. The people receiving help were not strangers, not really. Their lives touched her own in countless unseen ways. The realization expanded her compassion, because compassion grows naturally when separation weakens. One autumn afternoon, Emmy sat beside the river with her grandmother. The water moved gently beneath golden leaves. For a while, neither spoke. Then Emmy asked, "Do you think everyone is connected?" Akiko smiled. "Everyone." The younger woman nodded. "The farmers, the merchants, the travelers, the people in distant cities. The people we'll never meet." The old woman watched the river, then pointed toward the current. "Where does the water come from?" "The mountains." "And where does it go?" "The sea." The grandmother nodded. "Does the river ask permission before connecting everything?" Emmy laughed softly. The lesson felt familiar. Nature understood interconnectedness better than people often did. The river nourished villages it never saw. The clouds carried water from distant oceans. The trees shared nutrients through hidden roots. Life itself seemed woven together. The separation humans perceived often existed more in thought than reality. As the years passed, Emmy became one of the village's most respected weavers. Not because her skill improved dramatically, though it did, because her attitude transformed. The need for recognition slowly faded. Not completely. Human desires rarely disappear overnight, but it loosened, softened. Whenever people praised her work, she felt grateful. Yet she no longer imagined herself standing alone behind it. She saw the web, the countless contributions hidden inside every achievement. The perspective brought humility and freedom, because carrying success alone is surprisingly heavy. Sharing it feels lighter. One winter, a young apprentice began studying under her. The girl was talented, ambitious, and impatient, very impatient. One afternoon, after completing a beautiful piece of cloth, the apprentice asked, "Do you think people will remember my name?" The question instantly reminded Emmy of her younger self. She smiled. "Maybe." The apprentice looked pleased. Then Emmy continued, "Will you remember theirs?" The girl frowned. "Theirs? The farmers, the teachers, the people who helped you learn." The apprentice grew quiet. The lesson had begun. Just as it once began for Emmy, years continued flowing. The village prospered. Children grew into adults. Adults grew old. New generations arrived. The web expanded. One spring, a traveler brought news from a distant kingdom. A noble family had commissioned garments made from cloth originating in Green Hollow. The villagers celebrated. The achievement felt extraordinary. Yet Emmy noticed something different. The cloth had traveled farther than any person who created it, crossing borders, connecting strangers, touching lives far beyond the village. The invisible threads stretched farther than anyone imagined, and still, the web continued growing. Late in life, Emmy developed a habit. Whenever she completed a piece of cloth, she paused before cutting the final thread. For a moment, she reflected, not on herself, on everyone involved: the farmers, the rain, the soil, the teachers, the workers, the countless visible and invisible causes that made the cloth possible. The practice filled her with gratitude, because gratitude naturally follows awareness of connection. When we believe we stand alone, entitlement often appears. When we see clearly, appreciation follows. One evening, many years later, villagers gathered around a fire much as they had when Master Jun first arrived. Children sat near the front. Adults gathered behind. Stories filled the night. Eventually, someone asked Emmy, "What is the most important thing you learned from weaving?" The old woman smiled. The answer arrived immediately. "Weaving taught me that nothing stands alone." The crowd listened quietly. She picked up a piece of cloth, then held it toward the firelight. Remove enough threads and the fabric falls apart. She looked around at the gathered faces. The same is true of life. The lesson settled gently over the crowd, simple, yet profound. That night, after everyone departed, Emmy remained beside the dying fire. The stars stretched across the sky. The valley rested peacefully below. She thought about her life, the cloth she had woven, the people she had known, the lessons she had learned. Then she thought about the invisible threads, the friendships, the kindnesses, the shared meals, the teachings, the moments of support, the countless ways lives touched one another, most of them impossible to measure, many impossible to see, yet undeniably real. The web extended through everything, always had, always would. The realization filled her with quiet wonder. And perhaps that is the lesson. Many people move through life believing they are separate, independent, self-made, alone. The Buddha taught something very different. He taught dependent origination, the understanding that all things arise through causes and conditions. Nothing exists entirely by itself. Not a tree, not a river, not a person. Every life depends upon countless other lives. Every action influences countless other actions. Every kindness ripples outward. Every cruelty ripples outward. The weaver of invisible threads reminds us that existence resembles a great woven fabric. Each thread matters. Each connection matters. Pull one thread and the entire pattern responds. Strengthen one thread and the entire fabric benefits. When we understand this deeply, compassion becomes natural, because helping others is not separate from helping ourselves. Kindness becomes natural, because we recognize our shared participation in the same web. Humility becomes natural, because we see how much we owe to others. The cloth of life is woven from countless invisible threads. Most remain unseen, yet they hold everything together. And the moment we begin noticing them, the world changes. Not because the web suddenly appears, because we finally see what was there all along. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. There was once a small village nestled between rolling green hills and a winding river that shimmered like silver beneath the morning sun. The people of the village lived simple lives. They grew rice in flooded fields. They gathered vegetables from small gardens. They rose with the birds and slept soon after sunset. Above the village, perched on a quiet hillside, stood a modest monastery. The monks there owned very little: a few robes, a meditation hall, a vegetable garden, and several large clay jars used to collect water from the river below. Every morning before dawn, one of the younger monks would walk down the steep path, carrying a wooden pole across his shoulders. Hanging from either end of the pole was a water jar. The jars were filled at the river and carried back up the hill to the monastery. It was simple work, necessary work, work that had been done for generations. One spring, a novice named Tenzin was given responsibility for fetching the water. Tenzin was young, energetic, and eager to prove himself. He wanted to become the most disciplined novice the monastery had ever known. He wanted to do everything perfectly. On his first morning, he inspected the 2 clay jars that would accompany him on the journey. One jar was smooth and flawless. Its surface gleamed in the dawn light. Not a single mark could be found upon it. The other jar was different. A thin crack ran along one side. The crack had been repaired many times, but it remained visible. Tenzin frowned. "Why are we still using this jar?" he asked. An elderly monk named Dorje smiled. "It still serves its purpose, but it leaks. A little. We should replace it." Dorje only laughed softly. "Perhaps." Tenzin shook his head. The old monk was kind, but sometimes his answers made no sense. The next morning, Tenzin carried the jars down to the river. He filled both completely. Then he began the long climb back up the hill. The journey was difficult. The path was narrow. The slope was steep. By the time he reached the monastery, sweat covered his face. When he set the jars down, he noticed something. The perfect jar remained full. The cracked jar had lost nearly half its water. Tenzin sighed. What a waste. The same thing happened the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Every morning the cracked jar lost water along the path. Every morning the perfect jar delivered its entire load. Tenzin grew increasingly annoyed. The flaw seemed obvious. Why keep something that failed at its task? One evening he approached the abbot. "Master," he said, "we should replace the cracked jar." The abbot looked up from his evening tea. "Why?" "It leaks." "Does it?" "Every day." The old monk nodded thoughtfully. "And does this trouble you?" "Of course it does." The abbot smiled. "Continue carrying it a little longer." Tenzin was disappointed. That was all the answer he received. So he continued his work. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The seasons slowly changed. Spring blossoms gave way to summer warmth. The river flowed steadily. The hills remained green, and the cracked jar continued losing water. One morning, as Tenzin climbed the path, something unusual caught his eye. Small flowers were growing beside the trail. Tiny blue flowers, bright yellow flowers, clusters of white blossoms swaying gently in the breeze. He had never paid much attention to them before, yet now he noticed something strange. The flowers grew almost entirely on one side of the path, the side where the cracked jar hung. The other side remained mostly bare. Tenzin paused. He looked closer. The flowers stretched along nearly the entire route from the river to the monastery. Curious, he continued walking. The next morning he paid attention again, and the next. Each day he noticed more beauty along that side of the trail. Butterflies gathered among the blossoms. Bees drifted from flower to flower. Even small birds occasionally perched nearby. The once ordinary path seemed alive with color. Still, Tenzin could not understand the connection. One evening he mentioned the flowers to Dorje. The elderly monk smiled knowingly. "Beautiful, aren't they?" "Yes." "They weren't always there." "No?" Dorje shook his head. "There was a time when that side of the path was dry and empty." Tenzin frowned. "What changed?" The old monk simply sipped his tea. "You should ask the jar." Tenzin stared at him. Then Dorje laughed. "I am serious." That night, Tenzin found himself thinking about the cracked jar. The next morning, before sunrise, he carried the jars down to the river as usual. The air was cool. Mist drifted across the water. Birds were just beginning to wake. After filling the jars, he stood quietly for a moment. Then, feeling slightly foolish, he spoke. "If you could talk," he said to the cracked jar, "what would you tell me?" Of course, the jar did not answer, or at least, not in words. But as Tenzin climbed the path, he found himself noticing every drop that escaped through the crack. Drop after drop fell onto the earth. Drop after drop soaked into the soil. Drop after drop nourished roots hidden beneath the ground. By the time he reached the monastery, a realization had begun to form. Later that day, he sought out the abbot. "Master," he said, "I think I understand something." The old monk motioned for him to sit. "The cracked jar loses water." "Yes, but the water is not truly lost." The abbot smiled. "Continue." Tenzin thought carefully. "The flowers exist because of the crack." "Go on." "If the jar were perfect, the path would be empty." The old monk nodded. "And what does that teach you?" Tenzin hesitated. He sensed there was something deeper still. The abbot waited patiently. Finally, Tenzin said, "Perhaps flaws are not always useless." The old monk's smile widened. "Now you are beginning to see." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the abbot said softly, Many people spend their entire lives wishing they were perfect. Tenzin listened. They compare themselves to others. They hide their weaknesses. They become ashamed of their scars. They see only what is missing. The old monk gestured toward the hillside outside. But life does not work that way. Tenzin followed his gaze. The evening sunlight illuminated the distant trail. From this height, the line of flowers appeared like a ribbon of color winding down the mountain. The cracked jar believed it was failing, said the abbot, but it was creating beauty everywhere it went. The words settled deeply into Tenzin's heart. Over the following years, he thought about them often, whenever he made mistakes, whenever he felt inadequate, whenever he compared himself to others. He remembered the flowers. One summer, a traveler arrived at the monastery. The man was deeply troubled. He carried a visible scar across his face. For years he had hidden it beneath cloth whenever possible. He believed it made him ugly. He believed people judged him because of it. He believed it had ruined his life. The traveler spoke with Tenzin, who by then had become an experienced monk. After listening quietly, Tenzin led him down the hillside. Together, they walked the path toward the river. The flowers were blooming once again. Brilliant yellow, deep violet, pure white. The traveler admired them. They are beautiful. They are. Who planted them? Tenzin smiled. No one. The traveler looked confused. Then Tenzin told him the story of the cracked jar. When he finished, the traveler remained silent for several minutes. Finally, he touched the scar on his face. Perhaps I have been looking at myself the wrong way. Tenzin nodded. Perhaps. Years continued to pass. The cracked jar grew older. The crack widened slightly. Additional repairs became necessary. Still, the monks continued using it. One autumn morning, a new novice arrived. Like Tenzin long ago, he immediately noticed the flaw. "Why don't you replace that broken jar?" he asked. The older monks exchanged amused glances. Instead of answering directly, Tenzin handed him the carrying pole. "Come," he said. Together they walked to the river. They filled the jars. Then they began the climb back up the hill. As the cracked jar dripped water along the trail, the novice watched curiously. The flowers were in bloom. Butterflies danced among them. The morning sunlight painted everything gold. Halfway up the hill, understanding dawned upon him. "Oh," Tenzin smiled. "Yes." The novice looked back at the flowers stretching into the distance. The crack created all of this. It did. The young monk walked in silence for the remainder of the journey, and in that silence, he learned a lesson that no book could have taught. Not everything valuable appears perfect. Not everything imperfect is broken. Sometimes the very thing we wish to hide becomes the source of unexpected beauty. Sometimes our wounds teach compassion. Sometimes our failures teach wisdom. Sometimes our scars help others feel less alone. The crack remains, but so do the flowers. And perhaps that is the lesson. The goal of life is not to become flawless. The goal is to become useful, kind, and awake. To allow even our imperfections to nourish the world around us. Like the cracked jar carrying water up the hillside, we may never perform every task perfectly. We may lose something along the way. We may stumble. We may carry old scars. But if those very imperfections help bring beauty, understanding, or compassion into the lives of others, then perhaps they were never imperfections at all. Perhaps they were simply another way life teaches us to bloom, Long before maps marked the valley, travelers spoke of a place where the mountains listened. Hidden deep among towering cliffs stood a village unlike any other. The valley was beautiful beyond description. Green meadows stretched between stone walls that rose hundreds of feet into the sky. Streams flowed through the grasslands. Wildflowers covered the hillsides during spring. Birds nested among the rocky ledges. Yet the feature that made the valley famous was neither its beauty nor its isolation. It was its echoes. Every sound spoken there returned, not once, not twice, but many times. A single word could travel across the valley and bounce from mountain to mountain before gradually fading into silence. Children laughed and heard laughter returned. Songs came back as music. Greetings came back as greetings. Angry words came back as though the mountains themselves were shouting. Some villagers viewed the echoes as a curiosity. Others believed they carried a lesson. The elders often said, "The mountains never create a voice of their own. They only return what they receive." Most children nodded politely when they heard those words. Few understood them. Among those children was a boy named Riku. As he grew older, Riku became intelligent, hard-working, and ambitious. But he also developed a habit that quietly poisoned his peace. Whenever something went wrong, someone else seemed responsible. If crops failed, the weather was to blame. If plans collapsed, circumstances were to blame. If friendships ended, other people were to blame. If he felt unhappy, he searched for an external cause. Rarely did he stop to ask what role he might have played. Rarely did he examine his own actions. To Riku, life often felt unfair. And because life felt unfair, he carried a growing resentment toward the world. One summer, he partnered with a childhood friend to start a small trading business. At first, things went well. Then a series of poor decisions caused losses. When the partnership failed, Riku blamed his friend entirely. Months later, he still complained about him. Another year, he argued frequently with his younger brother. Every conversation seemed to become a disagreement. Each time, Riku left feeling misunderstood. Yet he never considered whether his own sharp words contributed to the conflict. Gradually, frustration became his constant companion. The strange thing was that the more frustrated he became, the more frustrating life seemed. The pattern repeated itself endlessly. One autumn afternoon, after a bitter argument with a neighboring farmer over a damaged fence and several wandering goats, Riku stormed into the mountains. His heart burned with anger. The argument replayed itself again and again in his mind. With each replay, the other man's mistakes seemed larger. His own seemed smaller. By the time he reached a high overlook above the valley, his frustration had reached its peak. Unable to contain himself, he shouted, "Idiot!" The valley answered immediately, "Idiot! Idiot! Idiot! Idiot!" The sound echoed from every direction. Riku frowned. The response felt strangely personal. He shouted again, "You're the idiot!" The mountains returned it. "You're the idiot! You're the idiot! You're the idiot!" His anger intensified. For several minutes he continued yelling accusations and insults. Each one came back. Each one seemed to confirm his outrage. Finally, exhausted, he returned home. That evening, he complained about the experience to anyone willing to listen. "The mountains are hostile." The villagers laughed. Most understood exactly what had happened. Among them sat an elderly woman named Akemi. She was one of the oldest residents in the valley. People often sought her advice, not because she claimed special wisdom, but because her wisdom quietly revealed itself through the way she lived. After the crowd dispersed, she approached him. "Would you walk with me tomorrow morning?" Riku shrugged. "I suppose." The next day, they climbed together. The valley looked completely different in the morning light. Mist drifted between the cliffs. Birdsong echoed softly through the air. When they reached the overlook, Akemi sat upon a flat stone. "What did you shout yesterday?" she asked. Riku looked embarrassed. "A few insults." The old woman smiled. "Today, try something different." He thought for a moment. Then he shouted, "Hello!" The valley answered, "Hello, hello, hello, hello." A smile appeared on his face. Again. This time, "Good morning." "Good morning, good morning, good morning." The mountains replied warmly. Then Akemi said, "One more." Riku looked out across the valley. For reasons he couldn't explain, he shouted, "I wish you happiness." The cliffs answered, "I wish you happiness. I wish you happiness. I wish you happiness." The echoes drifted beautifully through the air. When silence finally returned, Akemi asked, "What did you learn?" Riku stared across the mountains. Slowly he answered, "The valley returns what it receives." Akemi nodded. "Yes." Then she asked, "Do you think mountains are the only things that work this way?" The question lingered. For days, for weeks, perhaps even years. At first, Riku dismissed it. Life was more complicated than an echo. Yet once the question entered his mind, it refused to leave. He began observing people more carefully. He noticed that when he expected conflict, conflict often appeared. When he approached conversations defensively, others became defensive too. When he carried anger into a room, tension followed. The pattern was uncomfortable to witness, because it required him to consider something he had avoided for years, his own contribution. Several months later, still uncertain about the lesson, he returned to the overlook alone. This time his anger had a different source. A trading opportunity had collapsed unexpectedly. He felt cheated by fate. He looked across the valley and shouted, "Why does this keep happening to me?" The mountains answered, "To me, to me, to me." The final words echoed strangely. Riku sat down. For the first time, he noticed something. The valley never answered his question. It simply reflected it. Perhaps life was doing something similar. Perhaps many of the answers he sought could not be found by blaming circumstances. Perhaps they required looking inward. Years passed. The lesson deepened through experience. One winter, a widow named Emmy moved into the village. She lived alone. Her husband had passed away. Her children lived far away. Many villagers offered sympathy. Few offered practical help. Riku was among those who mostly ignored her. He had his own concerns, his own problems, his own responsibilities. Then one spring, after a severe storm damaged her small cottage, he unexpectedly found himself helping repair the roof. At first, he did so reluctantly. But as the days passed, something changed. He enjoyed the work. He enjoyed the conversations. He discovered that helping someone else somehow lightened his own burdens. Months later, during a difficult season when Riku became ill, Emmy brought meals to his home every day, without being asked, without expecting anything in return. One evening, as she left another basket of food, a realization struck him. Kindness had echoed back, not from the mountains, from life itself. The insight transformed something within him. Later that year, he shared this experience with Akemi. The old woman listened carefully. Then she said, "Many people misunderstand karma." Riku nodded. He had heard countless explanations. Most seemed confusing. Akemi smiled. Karma is not punishment. It is not reward. It is not a cosmic judge keeping score. She picked up a small pebble and tossed it into a pond. Ripples spread outward. Karma is simply the unfolding of causes and conditions. The mountains do not punish your words. They return them. The world often works the same way. The ripples continued expanding, then slowly disappeared. Every action plants a seed. Some grow quickly. Some take years. But seeds eventually reveal their nature. Riku never forgot those words. The older he became, the more clearly he saw their truth. Years turned into decades. Riku eventually became one of the village elders. People frequently sought his advice. Young couples asked about relationships. Farmers asked about disputes. Parents asked about children. Whenever possible, he brought them to the overlook. The valley became his greatest teacher. One evening, near the end of his life, a group of children accompanied him to the cliffs. The sun was setting. Golden light filled the valley. The children ran excitedly between the rocks. Finally, one little girl asked, "Grandfather Riku, what should we shout?" He smiled. For a long moment he looked across the mountains. Then he answered, "Shout the words you hope to hear one day." The children considered this carefully. Then one shouted, "Peace!" The mountains answered, "Peace, peace, peace." Another shouted, "Kindness, kindness, kindness, kindness." A third called out, "Friendship, friendship, friendship, friendship." Soon the valley filled with joyful voices. Love, hope, patience, compassion, laughter. Each word returned, again and again. The children laughed. The mountains laughed with them. As the echoes drifted through the evening air, Riku closed his eyes. For at last he fully understood the lesson the valley had been teaching all along. The world is not merely a place where things happen to us. It is a relationship, a conversation, an exchange. What we send outward often finds its way back. Not always immediately, not always obviously, but often more faithfully than we realize. Anger tends to create more anger. Kindness tends to create more kindness. Understanding invites understanding. Compassion invites compassion. Every action becomes a seed. Every word becomes an echo. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the cliffs, the valley spoke once more. Not with its own voice. It never had one. It had only ever been returning what it was given. And perhaps life, in its deepest wisdom, does much the same. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. Long ago, in a kingdom surrounded by mountains and rivers, there stood a monastery famous for a single flame. The monastery itself was modest. Its walls were simple stone. Its roofs were weathered by countless seasons. No treasures filled its halls. No gold decorated its shrines. Yet pilgrims traveled great distances to visit. Not because of the buildings, not because of the monks, but because of a candle. According to tradition, a single flame had burned continuously in the monastery for generations. The candle itself had been replaced many times. The wax was never the same. The wick was never the same. Yet the flame endured. Each new candle was lit from the previous one. The light passed forward, year after year, decade after decade. The monks called it the flame of compassion. Visitors often sat before it in silence. Some prayed, some reflected, some simply watched the small fire dance in the darkness. Among those visitors was a young man named Harin. Harin had recently inherited a successful trading business from his father. By most measures, he was fortunate. He possessed wealth, a comfortable home, good health, a respected name. Yet despite these blessings, he lived with a persistent fear, the fear of losing what he had. The more he accumulated, the stronger the fear became. He guarded his possessions carefully. He avoided risks. He rarely shared more than necessary. Whenever someone requested help, he calculated what it might cost him. In his mind, life resembled a balance sheet. If he gave something away, he had less. If others gained, he worried he might lose. This mindset extended beyond money. He protected his time, his energy, his attention. Even his kindness felt carefully rationed. Though outwardly successful, he often felt strangely isolated, as if invisible walls surrounded him. One autumn, after months of feeling increasingly dissatisfied, he decided to visit the monastery. Perhaps the monks possessed some wisdom that could help him. Perhaps they knew something about peace. After a long journey, he finally arrived. The monastery stood atop a hill overlooking a wide valley. Prayer flags fluttered in the wind. Pine trees surrounded the grounds. The atmosphere felt unusually calm. That evening, Harin joined several visitors in the meditation hall. At the center of the room stood the famous candle. Its flame burned steadily, small, quiet, unremarkable, and yet strangely captivating. For a long time he watched it. Eventually, an elderly monk approached. His name was Venerable Rahula. The monk sat beside him. Neither spoke at first. Finally, Harin asked, "Why do so many people come to see a candle?" The old monk smiled. "Perhaps they are not coming to see the candle." "What then?" "The lesson." Harin looked puzzled. "What lesson?" The monk pointed toward the flame. Then he asked, "If I use this candle to light another, what happens?" "The second candle gains a flame." "And the first?" "It keeps its flame." The monk nodded. Then he asked, "If I light 10 candles?" "The same thing." 100? "The same." 1,000? Harin paused. "The same." The old monk smiled. "Exactly." The conversation ended there, or so it seemed. But the question remained with Harin. Over the following days, he stayed at the monastery. Each evening he returned to the candle. Each evening he watched visitors light small lamps from its flame. Children, farmers, travelers, merchants. Each approached with their own unlit candle. Each departed carrying light. Yet the original flame never appeared diminished. One morning, while helping in the monastery kitchen, Harin noticed a similar pattern. The cooks prepared food for everyone. The more they shared, the more joyful they seemed. This confused him. In his experience, giving usually felt like losing. Yet the monks appeared to experience something different. Later that day, he asked Rahula about it. The old monk listened carefully. Then he said, "There are some things that grow by being shared." Harin frowned. "Like what?" The monk smiled. "Kindness." The young merchant remained unconvinced. Kindness sounded pleasant, but practical life required resources. Resources were limited. The old monk seemed to understand his skepticism, so he offered no argument. Instead he said, "Watch carefully." Several days later, an opportunity arrived. A violent storm struck a nearby village. Heavy rains damaged homes. Several families lost most of their possessions. News quickly reached the monastery. Without hesitation, the monks organized assistance. Food, blankets, tools, labor, everything they could spare. Harin observed with fascination. The monastery already owned very little. Yet the monks gave freely. They worked tirelessly. They asked for nothing in return. Eventually, curiosity overcame him. He joined them. At first, he participated reluctantly. He viewed the effort as temporary, a simple act of courtesy, nothing more. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. He began speaking with the villagers, listening to their stories, helping repair homes, carrying supplies, sharing meals. Gradually, the invisible distance he usually maintained between himself and others began shrinking. One afternoon, while repairing a damaged roof, an elderly woman handed him a bowl of soup. It was simple, probably one of the few meals she could spare. Yet the gratitude in her eyes affected him deeply. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt happier receiving that humble bowl of soup than he had felt during many profitable business deals. The realization unsettled him. After returning to the monastery, he sought out Rahula. Something strange happened. The old monk smiled. "Tell me." Haran described his experience. The feeling of connection, the unexpected joy, the sense that helping others somehow benefited him as well. When he finished, Rahula nodded. Then he asked, "Did helping them make you poorer?" The merchant considered carefully. "No." "In what way?" Haran struggled to answer. Materially, he had given time and effort, yet somehow he felt richer. Not financially. Something else. Something difficult to name. The monk smiled. "The candle loses nothing by sharing its flame." The words landed differently this time, because now they matched experience. Not theory. Experience. Months later, Haran returned to his business, yet he was not the same man. Gradually, he began changing the way he operated. He treated workers more generously. He supported struggling families. He offered apprenticeships to young people who lacked opportunities. At first, some of his colleagues thought he was foolish, too generous, too trusting. Yet over time, something remarkable happened. The business prospered, not because generosity guaranteed success, but because trust created stronger relationships. Loyalty deepened. Community strengthened. People genuinely wanted to support someone who supported them. Years passed. The changes continued. One winter, a severe illness spread through the region. Many families struggled. Fear spread quickly. Some merchants increased prices to maximize profit. Others hoarded supplies. Haran chose a different path. He distributed food, provided medicine where possible, extended credit without interest. Many advised against it. The risks were significant. Yet he remembered the candle, and he remembered the storm, and he remembered the bowl of soup. When the crisis eventually ended, something extraordinary became clear. The generosity he had offered returned in countless unexpected forms. Not always financially, sometimes through friendships, sometimes through trust, sometimes through opportunities, sometimes simply through knowing he had acted according to his values. One evening, many years later, Haran returned to the monastery. His hair had begun turning grey. His face carried the lines of experience. The famous candle still burned in the meditation hall. The flame looked exactly as he remembered. Small, quiet, steady. He sat before it for a long time. Eventually, Rahula appeared. Older now, slower, yet still smiling. The two men sat together in comfortable silence. Finally, Haran said, "I understand the candle." The old monk nodded. "What do you understand?" Haran watched the flame dance softly. Then he answered, "When I was young, I believed life was about protecting my light." Rahula listened. "I thought giving would diminish me. I thought helping others would leave me with less." He smiled softly. Now I see that some things only become meaningful when shared. The old monk's eyes brightened. Such as? Harren looked around the hall, then toward the candle. Kindness, compassion, wisdom, encouragement, hope. The monk nodded. Yes. The two sat quietly. The flame continued burning. One candle, lighting countless others, never diminished, always shared. As the evening deepened, several pilgrims entered the hall carrying unlit candles. One by one, they approached the flame. One by one, their candles ignited. The room gradually filled with light. Harren watched carefully. Each new flame seemed independent, yet all traced their origin to the same source. Suddenly, he understood something even deeper. The candle was not merely teaching generosity, it was teaching interconnectedness. No light exists entirely alone. Every act of kindness influences another. Every compassionate word spreads outward. Every moment of encouragement touches lives we may never see, like flames passing from candle to candle. The effects continue long after the original act is forgotten. Years later, after Harren had become an old man, children often asked him the secret to happiness. Many expected a complicated answer. Instead, he usually told them a story about a candle, a monastery, a storm, and a bowl of soup. Then he would ask them, "If you light another candle from your own, what do you lose?" The children always answered correctly, "Nothing." And Harren would smile, because perhaps that was the lesson. Many people move through life protecting their flame, afraid it will grow smaller, afraid it will disappear, afraid there won't be enough love, enough kindness, enough success, enough happiness. Yet the deepest treasures of the human heart do not operate like possessions. They operate like flames. The more they are shared, the more they spread. Compassion creates more compassion. Kindness creates more kindness. Hope creates more hope. The candle never becomes poorer for giving light, and neither do we. So when life offers an opportunity to encourage, support, teach, comfort, forgive, or help another person, remember the flame. Remember that some gifts multiply when given away. And remember that one small candle, burning quietly in the darkness, may illuminate far more than it ever realizes. For every light we share becomes part of a brightness that continues long after we are gone. Just as one flame, passed from candle to candle across generations, can illuminate an entire world. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. Every evening, just after sunset, a silver moon rose above the hills surrounding the village. It appeared slowly, first as a pale glow behind the mountains, then as a bright circle climbing into the darkening sky. The villagers rarely paid much attention to it. They had seen it their entire lives. To them, it was simply part of the world, like the river, like the wind, like the changing seasons. But one boy saw the moon differently. His name was Kaito, and from the time he was very young, he believed the moon was the most beautiful thing in existence. While other children chased butterflies or climbed trees, Kaito sat quietly watching the sky. He watched the moon rise, watched it travel across the night, watched it disappear at dawn. The sight filled him with wonder, yet wonder gradually transformed into something else, a longing, a desire, a need. The older he became, the stronger it grew. Eventually, Kaito convinced himself of something unusual. He believed he would never be truly happy until he reached the moon. At first, people laughed. Children often dream impossible dreams. But Kaito never abandoned the idea. As a teenager, he climbed hills hoping the moon would seem closer. When he reached the top, it remained far away. As a young man, he traveled to distant mountains. Still, the moon stayed beyond reach. No matter how far he walked, the distance never changed. Yet this only strengthened his determination. "If I can just get a little closer," he told himself, "then I will be satisfied." Years passed. Kaito became known throughout the region as the man chasing the moon. Travelers shared stories about him. Some admired his dedication, others considered him foolish. Most simply found him strange. Meanwhile, life continued happening around him. Friends married, families grew, children were born, harvests came and went, seasons changed. Yet Kaito remained focused on the moon. Always the moon, always somewhere else, always just beyond reach. One spring evening, while traveling through a forest, he encountered an elderly monk sitting beside a small pond. The old man appeared perfectly content. He sat quietly watching reflections ripple across the water. Kaito barely noticed him. His eyes remained fixed on the moon rising above the trees. The monk smiled. "You seem determined." Kaito nodded. "I am. What are you seeking?" "The moon." The old man looked up. "It is beautiful." "Yes." Kaito's eyes brightened. "You understand." The monk chuckled softly. "Perhaps." Encouraged, Kaito sat down. For nearly an hour, he explained his dream. His years of searching, his travels, his certainty that happiness awaited him somewhere beyond the next mountain. When he finished, the monk remained silent. Then he pointed toward the pond. "What do you see?" Kaito looked. "The moon." The reflection shimmered upon the water. The old monk nodded. "Can you reach it?" The young man frowned. "Of course not." "Why not?" "Because it's only a reflection." The monk smiled. Then he asked, "How do you know the moon in the sky is different?" The question annoyed him. "Because it is real." The old man nodded. "Yes." Then he looked at Kaito kindly. "And what will happen when you reach it?" The answer came immediately. "I'll finally be happy." The monk smiled gently. "Will you?" Kaito felt irritation rising. He had not traveled all these years to have his dream questioned. The old man seemed unconcerned. Instead, he picked up a small stone and dropped it into the pond. Ripples spread outward. The reflected moon shattered into fragments, then gradually reformed. The monk watched quietly. "Interesting." Kaito crossed his arms. "What is?" The moon remained unchanged. The old man pointed toward the sky, but the reflection became disturbed. The conversation made little sense. So Kaito left the next morning and continued his journey. Yet the monk's questions followed him, especially one: what will happen when you reach it? For years, he had assumed the answer, yet he had never examined it carefully. The assumption felt obvious. Reach the moon, become happy, simple, wasn't it? Several months later, Kaito arrived in a large city. The city contained everything he once imagined would bring fulfillment: wealth, entertainment, famous teachers, beautiful buildings, endless opportunities. He decided to stay. Perhaps the moon had only been a symbol. Perhaps happiness lived here instead. At first, the city excited him. Everything felt new, interesting, promising. But eventually, the excitement faded, as excitement always does. The city remained impressive, yet the emptiness remained too. Soon, Kaito found himself dreaming of something else. a distant mountain, a hidden monastery, a different future. The pattern felt strangely familiar. Whenever he reached one destination, another appeared. Whenever he obtained one desire, a new desire emerged. The finish line kept moving, like the moon. One evening, while walking through the city, he noticed a wealthy merchant sitting outside a grand house. The man looked miserable. Several servants attended him. Gold decorated his clothing. His garden stretched across an entire hillside, yet his face seemed exhausted. Kaito found himself surprised. How could someone possessing so much appear so unhappy? Later that week, he met a poor gardener working beside a temple. The gardener owned almost nothing, yet he laughed easily, smiled often, and seemed genuinely content. The contrast unsettled him. The gardener had less, yet appeared happier. The merchant had more, yet wanted even more. The pattern reminded him of himself. Several years passed. Kaito continued searching, not only for the moon, for satisfaction, for completion, for the feeling that something was finally enough. Yet the feeling never arrived. One autumn evening, while crossing a mountain pass, he encountered the same monk beside another pond, or perhaps another monk entirely. Age makes some people resemble one another. The old man smiled as though expecting him. "You are still traveling?" Kaito laughed. "You remember me?" The monk nodded. "The man chasing the moon." This time, Kaito sat willingly. The years had softened some of his certainty. For a while they watched the sunset together. Finally the monk asked, "Have you reached it?" The young man smiled sadly. "No." The old man nodded. "And are you happy?" Kaito considered carefully. "Sometimes. Only sometimes." The monk smiled. "That is already wisdom." Silence settled between them. The moon slowly appeared above the mountains. Its reflection emerged upon the pond. The old monk pointed toward the water. "What happens if you chase the reflection? You never catch it. Why? Because it moves whenever you move." The monk nodded. "And desire often behaves the same way." The words landed deeply. For the first time, Kaito truly understood. His suffering had never come from wanting beautiful things. The problem was believing those things would permanently complete him. Every achievement promised lasting satisfaction, then faded. Every possession promised fulfillment, then became ordinary. Every goal promised arrival, then revealed another destination. The moon itself was not the problem. The illusion was. The belief that happiness existed somewhere else, somewhere ahead, somewhere not yet reached. Over the following months, Kaito remained with the monk. He helped tend the garden, fetched water, prepared meals, meditated. At first, he found the simplicity difficult. His mind constantly searched for something more important, something bigger, something extraordinary. Yet gradually, he noticed something surprising. Peace appeared during ordinary moments, while sweeping leaves, while drinking tea, while watching rain fall upon the roof, while listening to birds at dawn. The moments he once overlooked contained a quiet richness, not because circumstances had changed, because attention had changed. One morning, while carrying water from a stream, he suddenly stopped. The realization arrived without warning. For years, he had treated the present moment as an obstacle, something to endure while pursuing happiness elsewhere. The future, the next destination, the next achievement, the next moon. Meanwhile, life itself had been happening here, all along. The insight felt both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful because it revealed freedom. Heartbreaking because of how much time he had spent looking away. Years later, Kaito returned to his village. Many things had changed. Children had become adults. Adults had become elders. Some people were gone. New faces appeared. The moon still rose above the hills exactly as before. One evening, he sat watching it with several village children. One young boy pointed toward the sky. "I wish I could reach the moon." The others laughed. Kaito smiled. Then he asked, "What would happen if you did?" The child thought carefully. "I'd be happy." The answer sounded familiar. Very familiar. Kaito looked toward the moon, then toward the fields glowing beneath its light. The wind moved gently through the grass. Crickets sang nearby. The night felt peaceful. Finally he answered, "The moon is beautiful." The child nodded eagerly. "Yes, but don't spend your whole life chasing it." The boy looked confused. "Why not?" Kaito smiled. "Because while you're looking up, you might miss everything around you." The child followed his gaze. The fields, the trees, the stars, the people sitting beside him. For a moment, everyone remained silent. The moon continued shining, exactly where it had always been. And perhaps that is the lesson. Desire itself is not the enemy. Without desire, we would never learn, never grow, never explore. The problem begins when we believe fulfillment exists only in the next achievement, the next possession, the next relationship, the next destination, the next version of ourselves. Like a man chasing the moon, we spend our lives running towards something that always appears slightly farther away. Meanwhile, the present moment waits patiently. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. The Buddha taught that craving often creates suffering because it places happiness somewhere else, always somewhere else. Yet peace begins when we stop demanding that life become different before we allow ourselves to experience it. The moon remains beautiful. Goals remain valuable. Dreams remain worthwhile. But perhaps we can admire the moon without chasing it. Perhaps we can walk toward our goals without believing they will complete us. Perhaps we can appreciate what is here while still moving forward. For happiness is rarely waiting at the end of the journey. More often, it appears quietly beside the path when we finally stop running long enough to notice it. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. There once lived a king named Haruto, who possessed nearly everything a person could imagine. His kingdom stretched from the sea to the mountains. His treasury overflowed with gold. His armies were strong. His palaces were magnificent. Travelers crossed continents to witness the beauty of his capital city. From the outside, his life appeared perfect. If happiness could be purchased, surely King Haruto would have been the happiest man alive. Yet every night, when darkness settled across the kingdom and the city fell silent, the king faced a problem no wealth could solve. He could not sleep. At first, the difficulty seemed minor. A few restless nights, an occasional interruption, nothing unusual. But over time, the sleeplessness worsened. Hours passed without rest, then entire nights, then weeks. The king became exhausted. His temper shortened. His patience vanished. His thoughts became cloudy. Physicians were summoned. The finest healers in the kingdom arrived. They examined him carefully. They prescribed herbs, special teas, rare medicines. Nothing worked. Musicians were invited to perform soothing melodies. Nothing worked. Perfumers filled his chambers with calming fragrances. Nothing worked. His servants replaced mattresses, blankets, pillows, curtains, and furniture. Nothing worked. The king remained awake, night after night. As months passed, the situation became desperate. The king grew obsessed with finding a cure. Ironically, this obsession made sleep even more difficult. Every evening he wondered, will I sleep tonight? What if I don't? What if this continues forever? The questions chased him through the darkness. One night, unable to bear the palace walls any longer, Haruto wandered through the gardens. Moonlight covered the stone paths. The fountains murmured softly. The world seemed peaceful. Everyone else appeared asleep. Only the king remained awake. As he walked, he noticed an elderly gardener sitting beneath a pine tree. The old man appeared perfectly relaxed. A small lantern rested beside him. His eyes were half closed. He seemed completely content. The sight irritated the king. How could a gardener possess the peace that had abandoned a king? Haruto approached. "Why aren't you sleeping?" The gardener opened his eyes, then bowed respectfully. "I was enjoying the night, Your Majesty." The king frowned. "Enjoying it?" "Yes," the gardener smiled. "The moon is beautiful." Haruto found the answer absurd. He sat down heavily beside the old man. "I have not slept properly in months." The gardener nodded. "I know." The king looked surprised. "You do?" "The entire kingdom knows." The old man spoke gently. "People worry about you." The king stared toward the moonlit pond. Then, unexpectedly, he confessed something. "I have everything. Yes. Wealth. Yes. Power. Yes. Comfort. Yes." The king's voice softened. "Then why am I miserable?" The gardener remained silent for several moments. Finally he asked, "What do you want?" The question seemed ridiculous. "I just told you." "No." The old man smiled. "You told me what you have." The king considered, then answered, "I want sleep." The gardener nodded. "And after that?" The king frowned. "What do you mean? When you sleep well, what will you want next?" Haruto opened his mouth, then paused, because the answer arrived immediately. A larger fleet, stronger trade routes, a neighboring territory, greater prosperity, more influence, more security. The list continued endlessly. The gardener watched quietly. Eventually he asked, "When does it end?" The king had no answer. The following day, Haruto could not stop thinking about the conversation. When does it end? The question followed him through meetings, through meals, through ceremonies, through every moment of the day. That evening, he summoned the gardener. The old man arrived carrying a small wooden box. The king looked at it curiously. "What is that?" "A gift." The gardener opened the box. Inside sat a simple clay cup. Nothing more. The king laughed. "A cup?" "Yes." The gardener handed it to him. Haruto turned it over. It looked ordinary, plain, almost worthless. "I don't understand." The gardener smiled. "Fill it." The king called for water. A servant filled the cup. The gardener nodded. "Good." Then he asked, "Can you fill it more?" "No." "Why not?" "It's already full." The old man smiled. "Exactly." The conversation felt strangely familiar to the king's earlier question. The gardener continued. "A full cup receives nothing." The king looked at the water, then back at the gardener. "What does this have to do with sleep?" The old man smiled sadly. "Your life is already overflowing." The king remained silent. "You have spent decades filling your cup." The gardener pointed gently toward the palace. More wealth, more land, more power. more security, more success. His voice softened. And now your mind has forgotten how to stop reaching. The words landed heavily because they felt true. Even in moments of triumph, the king immediately searched for the next achievement. Every victory produced another goal. Every accomplishment created another desire. Nothing remained enough for very long. Weeks passed. The king became increasingly aware of this habit. Whenever he received good news, his mind immediately moved beyond it. The harvest exceeded expectations. How can next year's harvest be larger? Trade expanded. How can trade expand further? The treasury grew. How can it grow faster? The pattern never stopped. One afternoon, while reviewing accounts, he suddenly realized something startling. He had not genuinely enjoyed a success in years, not because success was absent, because he never stayed with it. The moment one desire was fulfilled, another appeared, like a traveler reaching the horizon, only to discover another horizon beyond it. That evening, he sought the gardener again. Is desire the problem? The old man shook his head. No. The king looked surprised. No. Without desire, no seeds would be planted. No journeys would begin. No one would learn. The gardener picked up a fallen leaf. The problem is not desire. He let the leaf drift into a stream. The problem is believing fulfillment lives in the next desire. The king sat quietly. The gardener continued. Have you ever noticed what happens after obtaining something you desperately wanted? The king thought carefully. The answer was obvious. The excitement faded. Always. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but always. Then a new desire appeared. The cycle repeated. For the first time, Haruto saw his sleeplessness differently. Perhaps sleep itself was not the real issue. Perhaps his mind had been trained to pursue endlessly, even at night, especially at night. Months passed. The king began changing small things. He spent less time discussing expansion, more time walking through gardens, less time calculating future gains, more time noticing present blessings. At first, these practices felt unnatural. His mind constantly rushed ahead. Yet gradually, something shifted. One morning, while eating breakfast, he realized he was actually tasting the food, not planning, not calculating, simply eating. The experience felt strangely peaceful. Another evening, he watched a sunset from the palace walls. Years had passed since he last watched an entire sunset without interruption. The sky turned gold, then orange, then deep violet. Nothing was accomplished. Nothing was gained. And yet the moment felt complete. The gardener smiled when he heard about it. Good. The king laughed. Good. Very good. Why? The old man replied, You were somewhere other than tomorrow. Years continued passing. The kingdom prospered, but something even more important happened. The king slowly learned contentment, not permanent contentment, not perfect contentment. Human beings rarely experience such things, but enough to breathe, enough to rest, enough to appreciate. One evening, while sitting beside the same pond where he first met the gardener, Haruto noticed something. He felt tired, pleasantly tired, not exhausted, not anxious, simply tired, the way a person feels after a full day. The gardener sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, the king said, I think I understand. The old man smiled. What? I spent my entire life chasing the next thing. The gardener nodded. And? Haruto looked at the moon reflected in the water. The next thing never arrived. The old man laughed softly. Of course it didn't. The king smiled. Because whenever it arrived, it became the current thing. Exactly. Silence returned. The night felt peaceful. The water remained still. The moon shone quietly above them. That night, for the first time in many years, King Haruto slept deeply. Not because all his problems disappeared, not because he finally controlled the future, not because he acquired something new. He slept because, for a few precious hours, he stopped reaching. The Buddha often taught that craving resembles drinking salt water. The more we consume, the thirstier we become. Not because the water is evil, because it cannot satisfy the thirst we imagine it will. Many people spend their lives chasing one more success, one more possession, one more achievement, one more victory, believing the next thing will finally create peace. Yet the mind trained to seek endlessly rarely stops on its own. The finish line keeps moving, the horizon keeps retreating, the cup keeps demanding more, until one day we pause long enough to notice something. Perhaps this moment is already enough. Perhaps peace is not waiting beyond the next achievement. Perhaps it has been quietly available all along, like sleep waiting for a restless king to stop chasing tomorrow long enough to rest in today. And perhaps that is the lesson. The cost of endless craving is not merely exhaustion. It is the life we miss while pursuing what comes next. For the person who always wants more may eventually gain the world and still remain awake at night. But the person who learns contentment discovers a treasure greater than gold. The ability to rest, the ability to appreciate, the ability to be here. And in that simple enoughness, a kind of freedom appears that no kingdom can provide, and no loss can easily take away. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. There once lived a woman named Aya who carried more than anyone could see. From a distance, she appeared ordinary. She lived in a small village between green hills and a winding river. She worked hard. She cared for her family. She greeted neighbors politely. Nothing about her seemed unusual. Yet inside her mind, Aya carried a burden heavier than any traveler's pack. She carried tomorrow. Not tomorrow itself, of course. No one can carry time. She carried worries about tomorrow, and the day after, and the week after that, and the year after that. Her mind lived almost entirely in futures that had not yet arrived. When she woke in the morning, she worried about afternoon problems. When afternoon arrived, she worried about next month. When next month arrived, she worried about next year. The habit had become so normal that she rarely noticed it. She simply assumed this was what responsible people did. Prepare, plan, anticipate, worry, repeat. Her husband often noticed. One evening, while they shared dinner, he smiled gently. "You look troubled," Aya sighed. "I am thinking." "About what?" She immediately began listing concerns. The harvest, the weather, the roof, their savings, their children, the possibility of illness, the possibility of hardship, the possibility of failure, the possibility of possibilities. By the time she finished speaking, the meal had grown cold. Her husband listened patiently, then asked, "Are any of those things happening right now?" Aya frowned. "What do you mean? Right now?" The woman looked around. The house stood. The food sat before them. The children laughed in the next room. The evening remained peaceful, yet her mind was already somewhere else. She sighed. "You never worry enough." Her husband laughed softly. And perhaps you worry enough for both of us. The answer irritated her, mostly because it contained truth. The following spring, a wandering monk arrived in the village. His name was Ryosen. He was old, very old. His beard reached nearly to his chest. His robe showed countless repairs, yet his eyes held an unusual brightness. The villagers welcomed him warmly. Travelers often brought stories from distant places, wisdom, perspective, entertainment. For several days, Ryosen stayed near the village temple. People visited regularly. Some sought advice. Others simply enjoyed conversation. Eventually, Aya joined them. At first, she only listened. Then she noticed something strange. The monk seemed completely present. When speaking, he listened fully. When drinking tea, he drank tea. When walking, he walked. The quality felt unusual. Most people appeared divided, partly here, partly somewhere else. The monk seemed entirely wherever he happened to be. The difference fascinated her. One afternoon, she finally approached him directly. "Master?" The old monk smiled. "Yes? How do you stay so calm?" Ryosen considered the question, then asked, "Compared to what?" Aya laughed despite herself. "Compared to everyone else." The monk looked toward the village. Children played nearby. Birds moved between trees. The river flowed peacefully. Finally, he answered, "I stopped carrying tomorrow." The words puzzled her immediately. "What does that mean?" The old monk smiled. "Come walk with me tomorrow." The next morning, they followed a narrow path into the hills. The air felt cool and fresh. Wildflowers grew beside the trail. For a while, neither spoke. Eventually, they reached a small stream. The monk sat beside it. Aya waited. The lesson had not yet appeared, or so she thought. After several minutes, Ryosen asked, "What do you hear?" The woman frowned. "The water." "What else?" "Birds." "What else?" She listened carefully. Wind, leaves, insects, the distant sound of livestock. The monk nodded. "Good." Then he asked, "What were you worrying about 5 minutes ago?" Aya blinked. The question seemed unrelated. Then she realized something surprising. She could not remember. Not immediately. The old monk smiled. "For a few moments, you were here." The realization unsettled her, because it felt true. Over the following weeks, Aya visited Ryosen regularly. The lessons rarely resembled lessons. Sometimes they sat beside the river. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they drank tea in silence. The simplicity frustrated her. She wanted answers, techniques, solutions. Instead, the monk kept returning her attention to the present moment. One afternoon, while helping him tend a small garden, she finally became impatient. "I understand being present." The monk nodded. "Good. But problems still exist." "Yes." "The future still matters." "Yes." "Then why do you keep talking about now?" The old monk smiled, then pointed toward a wheelbarrow filled with stones. "Can you carry all those stones?" Aya shook her head. "Too heavy." The monk nodded, then removed a single stone. "Can you carry this?" "Of course." The old monk handed it to her. "What about 2? "Yes." 3? "Yes." Gradually he added more. Eventually the load became difficult, then impossible. The lesson appeared, slowly, clearly. The monk smiled. "Most people carry today's stones." Aya nodded. "Reasonable." Then he pointed toward the remaining pile. "And tomorrow's stones." The woman remained silent. The monk continued. "And next month's stones." "And next year's stones." The realization landed heavily, because she recognized herself immediately. Months passed. The teachings began changing her life, Not dramatically, gradually, one ordinary moment at a time. She still planned, still prepared, still acted responsibly. The difference was what happened afterward. Instead of repeatedly carrying future possibilities, she practiced setting them down. The process proved difficult. Her mind resisted constantly. Whenever one worry disappeared, another appeared. The habit had existed for years, perhaps decades. Breaking it required patience. One evening, a severe storm threatened the village. Dark clouds gathered. Strong winds arrived. Many people became concerned, including Aya. The old version of herself would have spent the entire night imagining disasters. This time, she prepared carefully, secured loose items, checked supplies, closed shutters. Then she sat quietly. The storm had not yet arrived. The future remained unknown. The present remained peaceful. The distinction mattered. The storm eventually came, then passed, as storms often do. Several years later, her oldest son prepared to leave the village. An opportunity awaited him in a distant city. The family felt proud and sad. Aya experienced both emotions intensely. The departure triggered countless worries. Would he be safe? Would he succeed? Would he be lonely? Would he make wise decisions? The questions seemed endless. One evening, she visited Ryosen. By now, the monk had become very old. His movements slowed considerably, yet his mind remained clear. After listening carefully, he asked, "Where is your son?" Aya frowned. "At home." "And where are your worries?" The answer appeared immediately. "Everywhere else." The monk nodded gently. "You are suffering from journeys neither of you have taken." The words lingered, not because they removed her concern, because they illuminated it. She loved her son. That would not change. Yet love did not require living permanently inside imagined futures. The years continued flowing. Aya's understanding deepened. Life remained unpredictable. People became ill. Plans changed. Unexpected difficulties appeared. Unexpected blessings appeared too. Again and again, she noticed something remarkable. The future almost never arrived exactly as imagined. Sometimes reality proved easier than expected. Sometimes harder, usually different. The endless rehearsals inside her mind rarely matched what actually happened. One afternoon, while watching clouds move across the sky, she suddenly laughed aloud. A friend sitting nearby looked confused. "What is funny?" Aya smiled. "I've spent years trying to solve problems that never arrived." The friend nodded slowly. "Most of us do." When Ryosen eventually passed away, the entire village mourned. His teachings had touched many lives, yet no one missed him more than Aya. For several weeks, grief accompanied her everywhere. Then one morning, while walking beside the river they once visited together, she remembered something. The sound of water, the movement of wind, the feeling of simply being present. The memory felt less like loss and more like continuation. The teacher was gone. The lesson remained. As she grew older, younger villagers often sought her advice. Many arrived carrying worries similar to those she once carried. One young mother feared everything: illness, accidents, failure, embarrassment, loss. After listening patiently, Aya asked, "What is happening right now?" The woman looked confused. "Nothing," Aya smiled. "Exactly." The lesson continued spreading, one conversation at a time, one moment at a time, much like ripples moving across water. Late in life, Aya developed a habit. Each evening before sleeping, she sat outside her home. The sky slowly darkened. Stars appeared. the village grew quiet. During those moments, she reviewed the day. Not tomorrow, not next month, not next year, only today. What happened? What mattered? What beauty appeared? What kindness appeared? The practice transformed her, because gratitude lives in the present, not in imagined futures. One autumn evening, a grandchild asked, "Grandmother, what is the most important thing you learned?" Aya looked toward the setting sun, then smiled. "The future is a terrible place to live." The child laughed. "But everyone goes there eventually." "Yes," the old woman nodded, "but only one day at a time." The child thought carefully, then smiled, because somehow the answer made sense. And perhaps that is the lesson. Planning is wise. Preparation is wise. Responsibility is wise. But many people unknowingly spend their lives carrying tomorrows that never arrive. They rehearse suffering, imagine disasters, borrow worry from futures that do not yet exist. The burden becomes enormous, not because today is unbearable, because tomorrow has been added to it, and the next day, and the next. The Buddha often taught that suffering grows when the mind abandons direct experience for endless mental projections. The present moment may contain difficulty, but it rarely contains every difficulty we imagine. The future deserves preparation, not residence. We can visit it, plan for it, then return home. Home is here, this breath, this meal, this conversation, this sunset, this step. The woman who carried tomorrow discovered something simple. When tomorrow arrives, it becomes today, and today is the only place life can actually be lived. So put down tomorrow's stones, at least for a little while. The road ahead will still be there when you need it, but the present moment is here now, and it has been waiting patiently for your return all along. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. The valley of Green Hollow stretched between rolling hills and distant mountains. Rich grass covered the fields. Clear streams crossed the meadows. Farmers had worked the land for generations. The valley was peaceful, predictable, steady. And among the many animals living there were two who could not have been more different. The first was an old ox named Taro. The second was a young horse named Casey. Taro moved slowly. Kaze moved quickly. Taro spoke rarely. Kaze spoke constantly. Taro had spent nearly 20 years working the valley fields. He had pulled ploughs through droughts, carried loads through storms, crossed rivers during floods, travelled roads few others remembered. Time had left its marks upon him. His coat was no longer glossy. His muscles were not as powerful as before. His pace had slowed considerably, yet his eyes remained calm, deep, patient. The kind of eyes that had seen many seasons. Kaze, meanwhile, represented everything young, strong, fast, energetic, confident. His legs seemed built from pure motion. Standing still felt almost impossible. He loved racing across open fields, testing his speed, showing off whenever an audience appeared. The younger animals admired him, and Kaze enjoyed being admired very much. One summer morning, while grazing near a stream, Kaze watched Taro slowly crossing a field. The old ox moved carefully, one step at a time, unhurried. The young horse laughed. "You walk like winter." Taro glanced toward him. "What does winter walk like?" "Slow," the old ox smiled. "Perhaps." Kaze trotted closer. "You should move faster." "Why?" The question surprised him. "Because it's better." Taro lowered his head and resumed grazing. The answer seemed obvious to Kaze. Speed was better. Youth was better. Strength was better. What else mattered? The old ox did not argue. He simply continued eating. Several days later, a farmer announced important news. A new grazing area had been discovered beyond the mountains. The land contained rich grass and fresh water. The problem was reaching it. The route passed through unfamiliar terrain, dense forests, rocky paths, steep slopes. Few animals knew the way. The farmers decided to send several animals ahead to scout the journey. Kays immediately volunteered. The opportunity sounded exciting. Adventure, exploration, new territory. What could be better? Several younger animals volunteered too. Then the head farmer made an unexpected decision. Taro would lead the group. The announcement shocked Kays. "The old ox?" The farmer nodded. "Yes." The horse frowned. "He is too slow." The farmer smiled. "Perhaps." The answer felt unsatisfying, yet the decision remained. The following morning, the journey began. At first, everything seemed easy. The weather was pleasant, the trail clear. The younger animals moved eagerly. Kays repeatedly raced ahead, then returned, then raced ahead again. His energy seemed endless. Taro maintained the same steady pace. One step, then another, then another. The consistency annoyed the young horse. After several hours, he trotted beside the ox. "You could move faster." Taro smiled. "I could." "Then why don't you?" The old ox looked toward the distant mountains. "Because the journey is longer than the morning." Kays rolled his eyes. Another old animal answer. Mysterious, unnecessarily complicated. The horse accelerated ahead again. By afternoon, the trail entered dense forest. The trees grew close together. Shadows covered the path. Several routes branched in different directions. The younger animals became uncertain. Which trail was correct? The forest looked identical in every direction. Kays immediately chose a path. This way. Taro examined the ground carefully, then shook his head. No. The horse frowned. "How do you know?" The old ox pointed toward faint marks in the soil. "Water flows that direction." The younger animals looked confused. Taro continued. "The valley lies beyond the water." The explanation seemed strange, yet after several hours, the old ox proved correct. His route led them safely through the forest. The horse said nothing, but the first crack appeared in his certainty. The following day brought rain, heavy rain. The path became muddy. Several steep sections turned dangerous. At one point, the trail crossed a river. Normally, the crossing would have been easy. The storm changed everything. The water flowed fast. Strong currents pushed against the banks. The younger animals hesitated. Casey studied the river. "It looks dangerous." Taro nodded. "It is." The horse looked surprised. "Then what do we do?" The old ox walked slowly along the riverbank, searching, watching, remembering. Eventually he stopped. Here. The crossing point looked unremarkable, yet the current flowed differently there. Smoother, shallower, safer. The animals crossed successfully. Only afterward did Kays ask, "How did you know?" The old ox smiled. "I have crossed many rivers." The answer felt almost disappointingly simple, yet impossible to argue with. Experience had noticed what youth overlooked. As the journey continued, Kays began paying closer attention. Not because he suddenly admired the ox, because curiosity replaced certainty. Again and again, Taro noticed things others missed. Changes in weather, signs of unstable ground, safer routes through difficult terrain, places to find water, places to avoid. The old ox carried something invisible, knowledge, not the kind found in books, the kind earned through years, mistakes, successes, failures, observation, time. The realization slowly transformed the young horse's perspective. Several days later, the group encountered their greatest challenge. A landslide had destroyed part of the mountain trail. The normal route no longer existed. Steep cliffs blocked one side. Loose rocks blocked the other. The younger animals became anxious. The destination seemed impossible to reach. For the first time, Kays felt genuine uncertainty. The old confidence no longer helped. Speed no longer helped. Strength no longer helped. Everyone looked toward Taro. The old ox remained calm. He studied the mountain, the rocks, the trees, the terrain. Then he nodded. "There is another way." The horse frowned. "How do you know?" The answer came quietly. "Because this is not the first mountain." The words carried more weight than before. Because now Kays understood. Experience's memory organized into wisdom. The old ox had seen similar problems before, perhaps not identical, but similar enough. The group followed him. Hours later, they emerged safely beyond the damaged trail. The destination finally appeared ahead. Rich grass, fresh water, beautiful land. The journey succeeded. That evening, the animals rested beneath the stars. The mood felt celebratory. Everyone spoke excitedly about the future, the grazing land, the successful journey, the adventure. Eventually, Kays approached Taro. The old ox sat quietly near the edge of camp. For several moments, the young horse said nothing. Then, "I was wrong." Taro smiled. "About what?" The horse laughed. "Many things." The old ox waited. "You move slowly." "Yes, but somehow you arrive." Taro chuckled softly. The younger horse continued. "I thought strength was everything." The old ox nodded. A common mistake. Silence settled between them. Then Kays asked, "What is more important?" The old ox looked toward the stars, then answered, "Knowing when to use your strength." The lesson stayed with the horse for the rest of his life. Years passed. Kays matured. His speed remained impressive. His strength remained considerable. Yet something else developed too. Patience, perspective, humility, the qualities he once dismissed. Eventually, younger animals began admiring him, the same way others once admired only his speed. One spring morning, a young colt approached him. The colt spoke excitedly, confidently, certain he understood everything. The conversation felt strangely familiar. Kays smiled, because suddenly he saw himself, many years earlier. The young colt eventually pointed toward an elderly mule grazing nearby. "He is too slow." Kays laughed. The memory returned immediately. Then he answered, "Perhaps." The colt looked pleased. Then Kays continued, "Maybe you should walk beside him." The youngster frowned. "Why?" The older horse smiled. "Because some roads are easier to understand after someone has already traveled them." Late in life, Kays often visited the grazing fields beyond the mountains, the same fields he helped discover years earlier. The journey there remained beautiful. The trails remained challenging, and every time he crossed a river or navigated a difficult path, he remembered Taro. The old ox had long since passed away, yet his lessons remained alive. The best teachers often continue teaching long after they are gone. And perhaps that is the lesson. Youth possesses many gifts: energy, strength, creativity, courage. These qualities matter deeply, but experience offers gifts of its own: perspective, patience, judgment, understanding, the ability to recognize patterns hidden beneath appearances. The Buddha often taught that wisdom grows through direct experience, not merely through knowledge, not merely through theory, through living, through observing, through making mistakes and learning from them. The old ox and the young horse reminds us that age is not merely the passing of years, it is the accumulation of lessons. Some people grow older, few grow wiser. Those who do become valuable guides for others, and wisdom flows best when youth and experience walk together. The young provide energy, the old provide direction. Neither is complete alone, for speed can move us quickly, but wisdom helps us move in the right direction. And often, the animal moving slowest sees the path most clearly. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.